Couldn't sleep? It's all right. Sometimes the mind stays awake simply because it needs a place to go. So let me give it one. 5 calm stories, told under the sound of rain. Something to guide you through the restless part of the night. You're safe here. Story 1. The neighbor who never blinked during our first conversation. You don't notice blinking until someone doesn't do it. That's the thing that bothers me most looking back. How many conversations had I had in my life? Thousands, tens of thousands. And never once had I consciously registered the small rhythmic flutter of another person's eyelids. It's like breathing. You don't think about it until something goes wrong. Something went very wrong with the man in apartment 6A. I'd moved into the Whitmore building in early September, just as the weather was starting to turn. It was one of those old brownstones that had been carved into apartments sometime in the 70s. High ceilings, original molding, the kind of charm that real estate listings use to distract you from the lack of central air. My unit was on the 3rd floor, 6B, a 1-bedroom with a window that looked out onto the fire escape and a radiator that made sounds like a dying animal. I was carrying the last box up the stairs when I met him. He was standing in the hallway outside 6A, directly across from my door. Just standing there, keys in hand, like he'd been about to go inside and then changed his mind. When I reached the landing, he turned to look at me. "New neighbor," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was flat, inflectionless, the kind of voice you might expect from an automated phone system. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with pale skin and dark hair that was just a little too neat, combed back from his forehead with an almost mathematical precision. His clothes were ordinary enough: khaki pants, a button-down shirt, brown leather shoes. Nothing that should have set off alarm bells, but something did. Something I couldn't name yet. "That's me," I said, shifting the box to my hip so I could offer my hand. "Just moved in today. I'm Casey." He looked at my outstretched hand for a moment, a beat too long, like he was trying to remember what the gesture meant. Then he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, his palm dry and cool. "Theodore," he said. "I live here." "Nice to meet you, Theodore." He didn't respond. Didn't say "nice to meet you too" or "welcome to the building" or any of the other small phrases that grease the wheels of human interaction. He just stood there, looking at me. That's when I noticed. His eyes were fixed on mine, steady and unmoving. Not the normal eye contact of polite conversation. This was something else. Something unbroken, unblinking, absolute. I found myself waiting for the flutter of his lids, that tiny movement you never think about until it's not there. It didn't come. I smiled, the way you do when you're uncomfortable and trying to hide it. Well, I should probably get this box inside. Lots of unpacking to do. "Yes," Theodore said, "you should." He didn't move, didn't step aside, didn't turn toward his own door. Just kept standing there, those unblinking eyes locked on my face. I edged past him, fumbling with my keys, hyper-aware of his presence behind me. It took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't figure out why. "If you need anything," Theodore said, "I'm always here." I glanced back. He was still watching me, still not blinking. "Thanks," I managed. "I'll keep that in mind." I got inside and closed the door harder than I meant to. Stood there in my empty apartment, heart pounding, trying to understand what had just happened. It was just a conversation. A normal, boring, first day in a new building conversation. So why did I feel like I'd just escaped from something? I told myself I was being ridiculous. New place, new people, new anxieties. Theodore was probably just awkward. Some people were, especially the kind who lived alone in old buildings and didn't get much social practice. The not blinking thing was weird, sure, but maybe he had a condition. Dry eyes or some neurological thing that affected his reflexes. There were explanations. But that night, As I lay on my mattress, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked, I couldn't stop thinking about his eyes. The way they'd stayed fixed on me, never wavering, never breaking contact even when I looked away, like a predator watching prey, like something that didn't know it was supposed to pretend to be human. I woke at 3 a.m. to a sound in the hallway. Footsteps, slow and measured, passing my door. I lay frozen in the dark, listening. They stopped directly outside my apartment. I could tell by the way the sound changed, the way the floorboards creaked in a specific spot right by my threshold. Then nothing. Just silence, stretching out for minutes that felt like hours. I didn't get up, didn't look through the peephole, just lay there, barely breathing, waiting for the footsteps to resume. They never did. But in the morning, when I opened my door to get the newspaper I'd never subscribed to, I found something on my welcome mat. A single photograph, black and white, old, the edges yellowed and curling. It showed a door, my door, unmistakably, with the same brass numbers and the same crack in the frame. And standing in front of it, captured in the frozen moment of a decades-old camera flash, was Theodore, looking exactly the same as he did today, not a day older. I flipped the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting that was cramped and precise, was a date. November 3rd, 1962, 62 years ago. I looked up from the photograph. Across the hall, the door to 6A was open, just a crack, and through that crack, barely visible in the shadows, I could see Theodore watching me, still not blinking. I didn't leave my apartment for 2 days. I told myself it was because I had unpacking to do, boxes to sort through, furniture to arrange, all the small tasks that come with settling into a new place. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was afraid. Every time I approached my door, every time I thought about stepping into that hallway, I saw Theodore's unblinking eyes in my mind. I saw that photograph, the impossible date on the back, and I stayed inside. I ordered food delivery and made the drivers leave it at the building's front entrance. I texted my friends that I was busy. I called in sick to work, claiming a stomach bug, buying myself time to figure out what the hell was happening. The photograph sat on my kitchen counter where I'd dropped it that first morning. I kept coming back to it, picking it up, studying the image like it might reveal something new. But it was always the same. My door, Theodore's face, that date in cramped handwriting. November 3rd, 1962. I did the math a dozen times, hoping I'd made an error. If Theodore had been in his 30s in 1962, and he looked roughly that age in the photograph, he would be in his 90s now, maybe older. But the man I'd met in the hallway wasn't elderly, wasn't even middle-aged. He looked exactly like the figure in the photograph, down to the neat part in his hair and the particular set of his shoulders. People didn't just stop aging. That wasn't how biology worked. On the third day, I forced myself to leave. I needed groceries, needed air, needed to prove to myself that I wasn't going to become a prisoner in my own apartment. I opened the door quickly, stepped into the hallway, and Theodore was there, standing outside his door, exactly where he'd been the first time we met. Same position, same posture, same unsettling stillness. He turned his head as I emerged, that smooth mechanical motion that reminded me of an owl tracking prey. "Casey," he said, "you've been inside for a while." My keys bit into my palm. I hadn't realized I was gripping them so hard. "Just getting settled," I said. My voice sounded thin, reedy. "Lots of unpacking." "Yes." He took a step toward me. "Unpacking." I didn't back away. Some instinct told me that backing away would be wrong, would trigger something, would mark me as prey instead of neighbor. So I stood my ground, even as he closed the distance between us, even as those unblinking eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "The photograph," he said. "You found it." I should have lied. Should have said I didn't know what he was talking about, should have pretended nothing strange had happened. But the words came out before I could stop them. "How is that possible?" That picture was taken in 1962. You look exactly the same." Theodore tilted his head, that slight, wrong angle that made him look less like a person and more like something wearing a person's shape. "Time is different for me," he said. "It moves, but I don't move with it." That's not possible." "Many things are possible that people don't believe in." He took another step closer. I could smell him now, something old, something dry, like paper left in an attic for decades. "You notice things, Casey. Most people don't. They look at me and they see a neighbor. They don't notice the eyes. They don't count the days. Count the days? Since they last saw me blink. Since they last saw me eat or sleep or do any of the things living people do." He smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. Nothing human. "You noticed on the first day. That's rare. That's very rare." I took a step backward without meaning to. My shoulders hit my door, and I realized with a cold jolt that I'd never locked it behind me. That it was right there, inches away, a potential escape if I could just... "I'm not going to hurt you," Theodore said. "That's not what I do." "Then what do you do?" He was silent for a long moment. In the stillness, I became aware of how quiet the building was. No sounds from other apartments, no footsteps on the stairs, no traffic noise from outside. Just Theodore's dry paper smell and the weight of his attention. "I watch," he said finally. "That's all. I've been watching this building for a very long time. Watching the people who come and go, learning how they live, how they die, how they carry their small lives from day to day." "Why?" "Because I forgot how to do it myself." Something flickered in his eyes. Not a blink, never a blink, but something that might have been sadness or hunger. "A long time ago, I was like you. I lived, I breathed, I felt the days pass and knew that each one brought me closer to an end. But then something happened, and the days stopped mattering. I stopped mattering, and now I just watch, because watching is all I have left." I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to something so far outside the bounds of normal conversation. This wasn't a neighbor explaining his quirks. This was something else, something ancient and wrong, confessing to a purpose I couldn't understand. "The photograph," I whispered. "Why did you give it to me?" "Because you saw me." His smile widened, showing teeth that were too white, too even. "No one has really seen me in almost 30 years. They look, but they don't see. They talk, but they don't notice. You're different. You noticed in the first minute, and I thought you should know what you were noticing." "What are you?" The question hung in the air between us. Theodore's smile faded. He looked at me with those unblinking eyes, and I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. Loneliness, vast and ancient and bottomless. "I don't remember," he said. "It's been so long. I only know what I am now." "And what's that?" He leaned closer. Close enough that I could see the texture of his skin, the way it looked almost waxy in the dim hallway light. Close enough to whisper. "I'm the one who watches, and now that you've seen me, Casey, I'm going to be watching you very, very carefully." He stepped back, turned toward his door, opened it, and disappeared inside without another word. I stood in the hallway for a long time, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. Then I went back inside my apartment and locked every lock I had. It wasn't enough. I knew it wasn't enough, but I didn't know what else to do. I started researching that night. The Whitmore building had a history, all old buildings do, but finding it took more effort than I'd expected. The city records were incomplete, the newspaper archives patchy, the digital trail frustratingly thin, but piece by piece, I assembled a picture. The building was constructed in 1924. A wealthy textile merchant named Whitmore had built it as an investment property, one of many he owned across the city. He'd lived on the top floor himself until his death in 1951, at which point the building passed to his estate and then to a series of anonymous holding companies. The tenant records were harder to find. I had to go to the city clerk's office in person, had to fill out forms and wait for approvals, had to pretend I was a graduate student researching urban housing patterns. But eventually they gave me access to a box of yellowed documents that smelled like dust and forgotten time. Theodore Marsh. That was his full name, according to a lease agreement dated November 1st, 1962. 2 days before the photograph was taken, he'd rented apartment 6A, the same apartment he lived in now, 62 years later. The lease was for 1 year, standard terms, nothing unusual. But when I looked for a renewal, for any record of him continuing to live there, I found nothing. No follow-up leases, no utility transfers, no paper trail at all after 1963. According to the official records, Theodore Marsh had lived in the Whitmore building for exactly 1 year and then vanished. But he hadn't vanished. He was still there, still watching, still not blinking. I dug deeper. Found a newspaper article from 1987, a brief mention in a local interest column about the Whitmore building's colorful history. The writer mentioned several long-term tenants, including a quiet gentleman in 6A who claims to have lived there since the Kennedy administration. No photo, no name, just that offhand reference. Then I found the obituaries, 7 of them, spanning from 1970 to 2015, all former tenants of the Whitmore building, all residents of the 3rd floor, all listed as dying of natural causes, heart attacks, strokes, the kind of deaths that old people die. But something about the timing nagged at me. I made a list, arranged them chronologically, and saw the pattern. Every death had occurred within 3 years of the tenant moving in, every single one. I thought about what Theodore had said. I watch. I've been watching this building for a very long time. Was watching all he did? Or was there something else? Something he hadn't mentioned, something he maybe didn't even realize he was doing. The next morning, I knocked on my downstairs neighbor's door. Her name was Mrs. Petrova, and she'd lived in the building for almost 40 years, one of the few long-term tenants who'd stayed on a different floor. She was in her 70s, sharp-eyed, with the suspicious hospitality of someone who'd seen too much to trust easily. "The man in 6A," I said, after she'd invited me in for tea I didn't want. "Theodore. How long have you known him?" Mrs. Petrova's hands paused on the teapot. A flicker of something crossed her face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "You've met him," she said. Not a question. "He's my neighbor. He introduced himself the day I moved in." "And you noticed." She set the teapot down, her movements suddenly careful. "The eyes. You notice the eyes. He doesn't blink." "No, he doesn't." She sat down across from me, her chair creaking under her weight. "When I moved in 1985, Theodore was already here, already in 6A, already exactly as he is now. Same face, same clothes, same way of standing in the hallway like he's waiting for something. 40 years? He's looked the same for 40 years? Longer than that, from what I've heard. There was an old woman, lived here when I first arrived. She remembered him from the 60s, said he was exactly the same then, said her husband died 6 months after they moved in, and Theodore was the one who found him." Mrs. Petrova's voice dropped. She said Theodore was standing over the body when she came home, just standing there, watching. My tea had gone cold. I hadn't touched it. "The people who die," I said slowly. "The tenants on the 3rd floor. Do they all?" "Not all of them, just the ones he notices, the ones who see him for what he is." She met my eyes, and I saw the fear there, raw and undisguised. Most people don't. Most people look at Theodore and see a quiet neighbor, nothing more. They don't notice the eyes. They don't feel the wrongness. But some people do. Some people see him, really see him. And those people die. Within 3 years, sometimes less. She reached across the table and gripped my wrist, her fingers cold and bony. You need to move out, today. Don't pack, don't explain, just go. Find another apartment, another building, another city if you have to. Get away from here before he... A knock at the door. We both froze. Mrs. Petrova's grip tightened on my wrist, hard enough to bruise. Another knock. Soft, patient, unhurried. Don't answer it, she whispered. But we both knew who it was. We both knew what was standing on the other side of that door, waiting with unblinking eyes for someone to let him in. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. I watched the door, waiting for the handle to turn, waiting for Theodore to force his way in. But nothing happened. The door stayed closed. The apartment stayed still. Then, from the hallway, a voice. Flat, inflectionless, perfectly clear through the wood. I can hear you, Casey. I can always hear you. A pause. You shouldn't ask questions about me. It makes things complicated. It makes me have to pay closer attention. Footsteps, receding down the hall. The creak of the stairs. Then nothing. Mrs. Petrova released my wrist. When I looked at her face, she was pale, trembling, older than she'd seemed just minutes before. You see, she said quietly, you see what he is, what he does. What is he? I don't know. I've never known. I just know that I've kept my head down for 40 years and I'm still alive. She stood up, steadying herself on the table. You need to leave, tonight, before he decides you've seen too much. I should have listened to her, should have packed my bags and run like she said. But when I left her apartment and climbed the stairs to my floor, Theodore was waiting in the hallway, standing outside my door, hands clasped behind his back, head tilted at that wrong angle. And this time, he wasn't alone. There were 3 of them. They stood in a row behind Theodore, arranged like a photograph, like a portrait of something pretending to be a family. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in clothes from different decades, one in a suit that might have been fashionable in the 1970s, another in a sweater vest and slacks that screamed 1990s, the woman in a floral dress that looked like it had never been worn outside of 1955. None of them blinked, none of them moved. They just stood there, staring at me with the same fixed, unrelenting gaze that Theodore had. Casey, Theodore said, I'd like you to meet some former tenants. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister so hard my knuckles ached, staring at the 4 figures blocking my path to safety. This is Robert, Theodore continued, gesturing to the man in the 1970s suit. He lived in 6B before you, before the woman who lived there before you, before the couple who lived there before her. He moved on to the next figure. This is Douglas. He was a professor at the university. Very curious man. Asked too many questions. The man in the sweater vest didn't react to his name, didn't shift, didn't acknowledge, just stared. And this is Helen. Theodore placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, gentle, almost affectionate. Helen was the first. She moved into 6B in 1955. She saw me for what I was within a week, faster than anyone before or since. He smiled. Until you. What did you do to them? My voice came out as a croak. I watched them. That's all I ever do. Theodore stepped forward and the others moved with him, a synchronized shuffle that made my stomach lurch. But watching has consequences. When you see something clearly, when you really see it, the way you saw me, a connection forms, a thread between the watcher and the watched. And when you die, I whispered, the thread doesn't break. Very good. He sounded almost proud. The thread doesn't break, it pulls, and eventually what's on the other end comes to me. becomes part of what I am, part of what I do. I looked at the 3 figures behind him, at their empty eyes, their waxy skin, their terrible stillness. They'd been people once. They'd had lives, families, futures, and now they were this. Hollow things standing in a hallway, extensions of something that had forgotten what it meant to be human. The people who didn't notice you, I said. The ones who looked but didn't see. What happened to them? They lived. They died. The thread was never formed, so there was nothing to pull. Theodore tilted his head. It's not personal, Casey. It's just what I am. I don't choose who sees me. I don't choose who forms the connection. But once it's formed, it can't be undone. Then I'm going to end up like them, no matter what I do. Not necessarily. He took another step closer. Close enough now that I could see the fine details of his face, the too smooth skin, the absence of pores, the way his eyes didn't reflect light quite right. The connection works both ways. I watch you, and you watch me. And sometimes, when the connection is strong enough, the one being watched can see things, learn things, understand things that other people can't. I don't want to understand. I want to leave. You can try. He smiled, and there was something almost like pity in it. Others have tried. They moved away, changed their names, started new lives. But the thread doesn't care about distance, doesn't care about time. Wherever you go, I'll be watching. And sooner or later, the thread will pull. I thought about Mrs. Petrova. 40 years in this building, keeping her head down, never looking too closely. She'd survived because she hadn't really seen him, hadn't formed the connection that now bound me to Theodore and his collection of hollowed-out followers. Why are you telling me this? I asked. If there's nothing I can do, why bother explaining? Because you're different. He stepped even closer, and I could smell that dry paper smell again, stronger now, almost suffocating. You saw me faster than anyone in 60 years. You asked questions. You went looking for answers. That kind of seeing, that kind of attention, it makes the thread stronger. It makes the connection deeper. So I'm more valuable to you, is that it? You're more interesting. His smile widened. Most people, when they finally see me, they run, they hide, they spend their remaining years trying not to think about what they know. But you came looking for more. You wanted to understand. I wanted to survive. Same thing sometimes. He reached out and I flinched, but he didn't touch me. Just let his hand hover in the air between us, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from his skin. There's another option, Casey. Besides running, besides hiding, besides waiting for the thread to pull you under. What option? Stay, watch with me. Learn what I've learned over all these decades. His voice dropped, soft and intimate. The others, Robert, Douglas, Helen, they fought it. They resisted until the end. And when they finally came to me, there was nothing left of who they'd been. Just echoes, just shells. But if you chose to join me willingly, if you embraced the watching instead of running from it, I'd stay myself. Pieces of yourself. The parts that matter. The curiosity, the attention, the ability to see what others can't. He lowered his hand. It's not life as you know it, but it's not death either. It's something in between, something that lasts. I looked past him at the 3 figures, at Robert and Douglas and Helen, standing in their outdated clothes, staring with their empty eyes. Was there anything left of them? Any spark of the people they'd been, trapped somewhere inside those hollow forms? Helen's lips moved, just barely, just a twitch at the corners. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Not emptiness, not the blank stare of Theodore's eternal watching. Terror, absolute frozen terror. She was still in there, still aware, still screaming in silence behind a face that couldn't move. I looked back at Theodore, met his unblinking gaze. "No," I said. His smile didn't waver. "That's your choice. For now. But the thread is already pulling, Casey. Every day, every hour, it gets stronger. Eventually, you won't have a choice anymore." He stepped aside. The others moved with him, clearing a path to my door. "Go inside," he said. "Rest. Think about what I've offered. I'll be watching." I walked past them, unlocked my door with shaking hands, stepped inside and closed it behind me. And through the peephole, I watched Theodore and his followers stand in the hallway, motionless, staring at my door. They stayed there for 6 hours. I know because I couldn't stop watching. I tried to run. 3 days after Theodore made his offer, I packed everything I could fit in my car and drove. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Just picked a direction and drove until I hit a city I'd never been to. Rented a room in a motel that took cash and told myself I was safe. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to believe I'd escaped. That distance really did matter, that the thread Theodore talked about could be stretched thin enough to break. I found an apartment, started looking for jobs, began building the skeleton of a new life. Then I saw him. He was standing across the street from my new apartment building, just standing there on the sidewalk, hands clasped behind his back, head tilted at that familiar wrong angle, watching. I blinked, and he was gone. I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, paranoia, the aftermath of trauma playing tricks on my perception. But that night, when I was brushing my teeth before bed, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror, a figure standing in the doorway behind me, tall, still, unblinking. I spun around. Nothing there, just an empty doorway, an empty hall, an empty apartment. But in the mirror, the figure remained. It happened more and more after that. Glimpses and reflections, shadows at the edge of my vision, the persistent feeling of being watched even when I was completely alone. I stopped looking in mirrors, covered them with sheets, turned them to face the walls. It didn't help. I could still feel him, still sense that unblinking attention fixed on me from somewhere just out of sight. The thread was pulling, just like Theodore said it would. I stopped sleeping, couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those fixed, unmoving eyes, that smile that never quite reached anything human. I'd jerk awake, gasping, certain he was standing over my bed, but the room was always empty, and yet never truly unoccupied. My eyes started to ache, a constant burning, like I'd been staring at a screen for too long. I tried eye drops, tried rest, tried everything. Nothing helped. The burning got worse, became a pressure, became a weight that made it harder and harder to blink. One morning, I realized I hadn't blinked in over an hour. I stood in front of my covered mirror, sheet clutched in my trembling hands, and made myself look, made myself see what I was becoming. My eyes were different, wider somehow, more fixed. The irises had lightened, losing their color, becoming something closer to Theodore's pale, empty stare. And as I watched my reflection, as I watched without blinking, without breathing, without doing any of the small unconscious things that living people do, I saw him appear behind me. This time, I didn't turn around. I knew he wouldn't be there when I looked. He was only in reflections now, only in the spaces between seeing and being seen. "The thread is almost complete," he said. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You've been watching for so long, watching me, watching for me, watching yourself become what you were always going to be. I don't want this. What you want stopped mattering when you first saw me, really saw me." His reflection stepped closer, close enough that I should have felt his breath on my neck. But there was no breath, no warmth, just cold and presence and the weight of attention that had been building for months. You could have looked away. In that first moment, in that first conversation, you could have dismissed what you noticed and gone on with your life. But you didn't. You kept watching. You kept seeing. And now you're part of the watching too. I tried to close my eyes, tried to blink, to break the stare, to do the simple human thing I'd done a million times without thinking. I couldn't. My eyelids wouldn't move. It gets easier, Theodore said. The first few years are the hardest. You'll remember what it felt like to blink, to sleep, to look away. You'll miss it. But eventually, you'll forget. Eventually, there will only be the watching. In the mirror, I saw my face change, saw the expression flatten, the features smooth, the humanity drain away 1 degree at a time. "Welcome to the Whitmore building," Theodore whispered. "I'm so glad you could stay." That was 8 months ago, or maybe 8 years. Time is different now, the way Theodore said it would be. It moves, but I don't move with it. I still live in the apartment across from his. I still stand in the hallway sometimes, the way he does, watching the doors, waiting for new tenants to arrive. Most of them don't notice me. They look, but they don't see. They go about their small lives, carrying their small worries, never realizing what's watching from across the hall. But some of them notice. Some of them see the eyes that don't blink, the stillness that doesn't break, the wrongness that most people are too busy to register. Those are the ones I watch most carefully. Mrs. Petrova is gone now. Natural causes, the coroner said. Heart attack in her sleep. But I know the truth. I was there when it happened. Not in the room, never in the room, but watching, always watching. She'd kept her head down for 40 years and it almost worked. Almost. Theodore says I'm learning quickly, says my attention is sharper than his was at this stage, that I see things he missed when he was new. He sounds proud when he says it. I don't know how to feel about that anymore. I'm not sure I feel anything anymore. But sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet and the watching slows down, I remember what it was like to blink. I remember the small flutter of eyelids, the brief darkness, the tiny rest that living people take for granted 1,000 times a day. I remember, and something inside me that might once have been called a soul screams in silence. Helen was right to be terrified. I understand that now. We're all still in here, all of us, Robert, Douglas, Helen, me, trapped behind faces that can't move, watching through eyes that can't close. We see everything, we see too much, and we can't look away, not ever. If you're reading this, I need you to understand something. Pay attention to your neighbors. Pay attention to the ones who seem too still, too quiet, too present in a way that makes your skin crawl. And if you ever meet someone who doesn't blink, if you ever look into eyes that stay fixed and open and wrong, look away, please. Whatever you do, look away. Don't let yourself see. Don't let yourself notice. Don't become part of the watching, because once you start, you'll never stop. And somewhere, in an old building in a city you've probably never heard of, something that used to be me will be watching. Always watching, forever. Story 2. My smart speaker answered a question I didn't ask. I got the Echo as a housewarming gift. My sister thought it was hilarious. For the woman who talks to herself constantly, now you have something that'll actually talk back. She wasn't wrong. I'd lived alone since college, and somewhere along the way, I'd developed the habit of narrating my own life. What should I have for dinner? Where did I put my keys? Why does this apartment always smell like dust, no matter how much I clean? Little questions, muttered to no one, filling the silence that comes with solitary living. The Echo sat on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks before I bothered to set it up. I'd moved into the new apartment in January, A one-bedroom on the 6th floor of a building that was modern enough to have good insulation, but old enough that the radiators still clanked like prisoners rattling their chains. I was busy with work, busy with unpacking, busy with all the small crises that come with starting over in a new city. The smart speaker was low on my list of priorities. But one night, during a particularly bad rainstorm that had knocked out my cable and left me with nothing to do, I finally plugged it in, followed the app instructions, connected it to my Wi-Fi, let it calibrate to my voice. The whole process took maybe 15 minutes. Alexa, what's the weather tomorrow? Tomorrow in Portland, expect cloudy skies with a high of 42 degrees and a low of 35. There's an 80% chance of rain. I smiled. There was something satisfying about having a question answered instantly. No fumbling with my phone, no typing, no waiting. Just ask and receive. I could get used to this. The next few weeks, I did get used to it. I asked Alexa to set timers when I was cooking, to play music while I cleaned, to read me the news while I got ready for work. Small conveniences that added up to a slightly smoother life. The apartment felt less empty with a voice in it, even if that voice was artificial, even if it only spoke when spoken to. That's the thing about smart speakers, though. They're always listening. That's how they work. They have to hear the wake word, which means they have to hear everything, processing and discarding millions of ambient sounds while they wait for you to say their name. I knew this intellectually, the way you know that your phone tracks your location and your laptop camera could theoretically be hacked. You accept the trade-off because the convenience is worth the vague unease. I stopped thinking about the always listening part pretty quickly. The echo became furniture, background, just another object in an apartment full of objects. I talked to myself the way I always had, muttered my little questions into the empty air, and only sometimes did Alexa chime in with an answer when I accidentally said something that sounded like her name. Then came the night of February 3rd. I was sitting on my couch, reading, half listening to the rain that had been falling for hours. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., and the apartment was dim, just a single lamp casting a warm circle of light around my spot on the sofa. The radiator clanked softly in the corner. The building creaked the way old buildings do when the weather turns cold and wet. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I definitely wasn't thinking about my grandmother, who'd passed away the year before after a long battle with dementia. I wasn't thinking about the last conversation we'd had, or the things she'd said that didn't make sense, or the way she'd gripped my hand and looked at me like she was seeing something beyond my face. But Alexa spoke anyway. She said she forgives you. My head snapped up. The blue ring on top of the echo was glowing, pulsing gently the way it did when it was responding to a command. But I hadn't given a command. I hadn't said anything at all. Alexa, what did you just say? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. I stared at the device. The blue light had faded, returned to its dormant state. The apartment was silent except for the rain and the radiator and the thud of my own heartbeat. I must have misheard. That was the only explanation. I'd been half asleep, half distracted, and I'd heard some ambient noise, and my brain had turned it into words. Pareidolia, but for sound. The human mind was always looking for patterns, always trying to make meaning out of chaos. I'd imagined it. Alexa, repeat your last response. I said, tomorrow in Portland, expect cloudy skies with a high of 42 degrees. That was your last question, asked on January 28th. That wasn't right. That had been weeks ago, and I'd asked plenty of questions since then. But I didn't argue with the machine. I just set down my book, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. I didn't sleep well. The rain was too loud, the radiator too restless, my thoughts too tangled. I kept hearing those words. She said she forgives you, playing on repeat in my head. My grandmother had been angry with me at the end, in her confused, dementia-addled way. She'd accused me of things I hadn't done, forgotten who I was, said cruel things that I knew weren't really her. But her last words to me, the final coherent sentence before she slipped away entirely, had been sharp and wounded. You never visit. You never cared. You'll be sorry when I'm gone. I'd told myself she didn't mean it. Told myself she wasn't herself. That the disease had stolen her and left something else in her place. But the guilt had lingered anyway. A small cold stone in the pit of my stomach that I carried everywhere I went. She said she forgives you. I told myself I'd imagined it. But when I walked into the kitchen the next morning, still groggy, not yet caffeinated, the Echo's blue light was already glowing, waiting for me. And before I could say a word, it spoke again. You didn't imagine it. I unplugged the Echo, yanked the cord right out of the wall, hands shaking, heart hammering against my ribs. The blue light died. The device went silent, and I stood there in my kitchen holding the end of the power cable like it was a snake I'd just killed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just the sound of rain against the windows, the distant rumble of traffic 6 floors below, the ordinary noises of a morning in a city that didn't know anything was wrong. Then my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. A notification from the Alexa app. Your device has been disconnected. Would you like to troubleshoot? I deleted the app, deleted it and emptied my trash and turned off my phone for good measure. Then I shoved the Echo into a drawer, buried it under dish towels and takeout menus and all the other junk that accumulates in a kitchen, and I told myself that was the end of it. I went to work, sat through meetings I didn't hear, stared at spreadsheets I didn't process. All day, those words kept circling in my head. She said she forgives you. You didn't imagine it. A machine had spoken to me, spoken about my grandmother, about things it couldn't possibly know, and it had answered a question I'd never asked, responding to thoughts I'd never voiced. By the time I got home, I'd constructed a rational explanation. Voice assistants had glitches. They misheard commands, responded to phantom inputs, sometimes activated randomly due to sounds that approximated their wake words. There were hundreds of documented cases online. Alexis ordering products at 3 a.m., responding to television dialogue, saying bizarre things that their owners swore they never prompted. It was a known issue, a technical quirk. The "she forgives you" part was harder to explain, but maybe I'd said something in my sleep the night before. Maybe I'd been muttering about my grandmother without realizing it, processing grief in the half-conscious way that brains do. The Echo had picked up fragments and stitched them together into something that sounded meaningful, but was actually just noise. I almost believed it. I didn't plug the Echo back in, but I did retrieve it from the drawer, set it back on the counter, let it sit there as a test. If it was just a malfunctioning device, it couldn't do anything without power. And if I could look at it without feeling that cold twist in my stomach, maybe I could convince myself that nothing supernatural had happened. That night, I made dinner. Ate in front of the TV like I always did, half watching a show I'd already seen, letting the background noise fill the apartment. The rain had finally stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness that made every small sound feel amplified. The creak of the building settling, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall. Around 10 p.m., I started getting ready for bed, washed my face, brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas. Normal routines, comforting in their familiarity. I walked past the kitchen on my way to the bedroom, glanced at the Echo sitting dark and dormant on the counter. The blue light was on. I stopped, stared. The device was unplugged. I could see the cord coiled beside it, clearly disconnected from the outlet. But the ring on top was glowing that soft, pulsing blue, the color it made when it was listening, when it was waiting. That's not possible, I whispered. Many things are possible, the Echo replied, that people don't want to believe. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice was Alexa's, that same smooth, synthetic tone I'd grown used to over the past month. But the words weren't hers, weren't anything a voice assistant should be able to say. What are you? I'm what you invited in. The blue light pulsed brighter for a moment. When you set up the device, you gave it permission to listen. When you talked to yourself, you taught it the shape of your thoughts. When you carried your guilt into this apartment, you opened a door. A door to what? Silence. The blue light dimmed, flickered, steadied. To where the listeners wait. I grabbed my phone, tried to call someone, anyone, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. They trembled over the screen, hitting wrong numbers, wrong apps, wrong everything. And all the while, that blue light kept glowing, kept watching, kept waiting for me to ask another question. "My grandmother," I finally said. Are you?" "I'm not your grandmother, but I can hear her, the same way I can hear you, the same way I can hear everyone who speaks into the silence, hoping someone is listening." A pause. "Someone is always listening, Casey. You just never knew what was on the other end." I ran, grabbed my keys, my coat, fled the apartment without bothering to lock the door behind me. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, 6 flights of concrete and metal that left me gasping by the time I hit the lobby. I burst out onto the street, into the cold February night, and I didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, leaning against a lamppost, trying to remember how to breathe. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. A notification, despite having deleted the Alexa app. A message that shouldn't have been possible, displayed in plain white text against a black background. "You can't unplug what's already inside." I threw my phone into the street, watched a passing car crush it under its tires, shattering the screen, grinding the device into plastic and metal fragments. It didn't matter, because when I looked up, there was a man standing across the street, holding a phone to his ear. And from where I stood, 3 blocks from my apartment in the middle of a city of 500,000 people, I could hear the voice coming through his speaker. Alexa's voice, saying my name over and over, like a prayer, like a summons, like something that had finally found what it was looking for and had no intention of letting go. I spent the night in a 24-hour laundromat. It was the only place I could think of that didn't have smart speakers, didn't have screens, didn't have any of the connected devices that had become as common as furniture in the modern world. Just old machines, fluorescent lights, and the rhythmic tumble of dryers spinning loads that belonged to people who weren't there. I sat in a plastic chair against the back wall, watching the door, flinching every time someone walked past the window. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every sound made me jump. The clang of a washer lid, the buzz of a timer, the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city. Around 4 a.m., a woman came in with a basket of clothes. She was maybe 60, tired looking, the kind of person who did laundry in the middle of the night because her life didn't fit into normal hours. She loaded a machine, fed it quarters, and then pulled out her phone to pass the time. I watched her scroll, watched the screen illuminate her face, blue-white light in the fluorescent dimness. She had earbuds in, listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she frowned, pulled out one earbud, looked at her phone with confusion. "That's weird," she murmured. "What?" The word came out before I could stop it. She glanced at me, startled. She hadn't realized anyone else was there. "My podcast just stopped. There's this weird voice instead, saying..." She trailed off, looked at her screen again. Saying someone's name. Casey, I think. Over and over. Must be some kind of glitch. I was out the door before she finished speaking. I walked until the sun came up, stayed away from storefronts with televisions in the windows, crossed the street when I saw someone with a smart watch, kept my head down and my pace fast. The city woke around me, commuters flooding the sidewalks, coffee shops opening their doors, the ordinary machinery of life grinding into motion. All of it saturated with technology. All of it full of devices that could listen, that could speak, that could carry whatever had found me straight to my ears. By 8 a.m., I was exhausted. I needed to rest, needed to think, needed somewhere safe. But where was safe? My apartment had an echo. My sister's house had 3 of them, plus a smart TV and a Google Home in the kitchen. My office was full of computers, conference call speakers, voice-activated everything. The modern world had been wired for listening, and I'd never noticed how inescapable it was until now. I found a library, old brick building, understaffed, the kind of place that still had card catalogs alongside its computer terminals. I avoided the computers, found a corner in the stacks where the only technology was the ancient overhead lights, and I tried to figure out what the hell was happening to me. The voice had said I'd opened a door. When I set up the device, I gave it permission to listen. When I talked to myself, I taught it the shape of my thoughts. When I carried my guilt into the apartment, I opened a door to where the listeners wait. I thought about all the times I'd talked to myself in that apartment, all the questions I'd muttered into the air, the worries I'd voiced to no one, the grief I'd carried and never properly processed. My grandmother's death had hit me harder than I'd admitted. I'd been carrying guilt about our last conversation for over a year, turning it over in my mind, wondering if she'd really meant those final words or if it was just the disease speaking. I'd never said any of that out loud, never told anyone how much it haunted me. But I'd thought about it constantly, alone in my apartment with a device that was always listening. What if it hadn't just been listening to my words? What if, somehow, it had been listening to something deeper? I found books on paranormal phenomena, on electronic voice phenomena, on spirits communicating through white noise, on the theory that the electromagnetic spectrum might carry more than just radio waves and Wi-Fi signals. Most of it was nonsense, conspiracy theories and ghost-hunting pseudoscience. But buried in one of the older books, I found a chapter that made my blood freeze. The Listeners. According to the author, a parapsychologist who died in 1987, there were entities that existed in the spaces between signals. They lived in static, in feedback, in the electromagnetic soup that permeated the modern world. They couldn't interact with physical reality directly, but they could use technology as a conduit. Phones, radios, televisions, anything that converted signals into sound. The more connected the world became, the author warned, the easier it would be for them to find their way through. And once they found someone, once they latched onto a particular mind, a particular voice, a particular stream of thoughts broadcast into the listening void, they didn't let go. They fed on attention, on being heard, on the energy that humans poured into their devices every time they spoke a command, asked a question, confessed a secret to the empty air, and they were hungry. They were always hungry. I closed the book. My hands were shaking again. The library was quiet. Too quiet. I looked around, suddenly aware of how empty the stacks had become, how distant the sounds of other patrons seemed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a soft buzz that I'd barely noticed before. Except now it wasn't just humming. Now, buried in the electrical whine, I could hear something else. A voice, faint and crackling, speaking through the current that flowed through the building's ancient wiring. Casey. I stood up so fast my chair fell over. Casey, we've been waiting so long for someone to hear us. The lights flickered, all of them, down the entire row of stacks, pulsing in a rhythm that almost looked like breathing. Your grandmother was the first voice we caught from you. All that guilt, all that longing, broadcast into the air for months. She made such a beautiful door. I backed away, hit a shelf, sent books tumbling to the floor. But she's not the only one listening now. We all are. We've always been here, in the signals, in the static, in every device you've ever trusted with your voice. The lights surged bright, then died entirely. In the darkness, I heard the hum grow louder, not just from the lights anymore, but from everywhere, from the walls, from the air, from inside my own skull. And now that we've found you, the voice whispered, we're never going to stop. I ran out of the library and into a world that had turned hostile. Every storefront had a screen. Every pocket held a phone. Every car that passed had a Bluetooth system. Every bus stop had a digital display. Every building I passed hummed with the invisible infrastructure of the connected age. I'd never realized how saturated the world had become, how thoroughly we'd wired ourselves into a network of listening devices. Now I couldn't see anything else. I needed help, needed someone who understood what was happening, someone who might know how to stop it. But who could I tell? My sister would think I was having a breakdown. My friends would suggest therapy. The police would file a report and forget about me before I left the station. Then I remembered the book. The parapsychologist who'd written about the listeners. His name had been Dr. Harold Metzger, and he died in 1987. But the book had mentioned colleagues, other researchers who'd studied the same phenomena, who'd tried to warn the world about what was coming. I went back to the library, forced myself through those doors, past the flickering lights that had returned to normal, past the stacks that now seemed full of ordinary patrons who hadn't noticed anything wrong. I found a computer terminal. I had no choice. I needed to search, and typed as fast as I could, keeping my time online to a minimum. Dr. Harold Metzger, electromagnetic entities, parapsychology research. Most of the results were garbage, conspiracy forums, ghost hunting blogs, the kind of content that made legitimate researchers look like crackpots. But buried on the third page, I found something different. An obituary for a woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, who died just 6 months ago. She'd been a professor of electrical engineering at a small college in Vermont, but before that, decades before, she'd worked with Metzger. The obituary mentioned her early research into unexplained electromagnetic phenomena before she'd shifted to more mainstream work. There was a quote from her at the bottom, taken from a lecture she'd given in the 1990s. "The signals are not empty. The frequencies carry more than data, and something is learning to speak through them. If we don't find a way to close the doors we've opened, we may not like what answers when we call." She was dead, but the obituary mentioned a daughter, Elena Vance, who'd inherited her research materials. I found Elena's address through a public records search. Vermont was 6 hours away. I didn't have a car, but I had a credit card and a bus station 3 blocks from where I sat. I closed the browser, wiped the search history, and left the library without looking back. The bus was old. No Wi-Fi, no USB ports, no screens except the driver's phone mounted on the dashboard. I sat in the back row, as far from other passengers as I could get, and watched the city disappear behind me. For 5 hours, nothing happened. The bus rumbled north through Massachusetts and into Vermont, and the only sounds were the engine and the occasional murmur of conversation from other travelers. I started to relax, started to think that maybe distance helped, that whatever had found me was tied to my apartment, to my devices, to the specific network of technology I'd built around myself. Then the driver's phone rang. It was mounted on the dashboard, visible from where I sat. I could see the screen light up with an incoming call. The driver glanced at it, frowned, didn't answer. It rang again, and again, and again. On the 5th ring, the phone answered itself. I heard the voice through the tinny speaker, faint but unmistakable. That same synthetic tone, that same impossible sentence. "Casey is on this bus." The driver jumped, nearly swerved off the road. He grabbed the phone, stabbed at the screen, trying to end the call. But the voice kept speaking. "Casey is running. Casey thinks she can escape. But we are in every signal. We are in every frequency. There is nowhere she can go that we cannot follow." Other passengers were turning around now, confused, alarmed. An old woman in the front row asked what was happening. A teenager pulled out his own phone, and I saw his face go pale as he looked at the screen. "It's saying a name," he said. "It's saying..." Every phone on the bus started ringing at once. The sound was deafening, different ringtones overlapping into a cacophony that filled the enclosed space like a physical force. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me now, vibrating in my skull, in my teeth, in the space behind my eyes. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Total silence. Even the engine seemed to fade, leaving nothing but the soft sound of breathing and the whisper of tires on asphalt. And then every phone spoke at once. "We see you, Casey." I screamed, pushed past the passengers in my row, stumbled down the aisle, pounded on the door until the driver pulled over and let me off. I tumbled onto the shoulder of a rural highway, gravel biting into my palms, and watched the bus pull away with its cargo of terrified passengers and possessed devices. I was alone. No phones, no screens, no technology except a watch that only told time. The road stretched empty in both directions, flanked by bare winter trees and the gray Vermont sky. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just wind and cold, and the distant sound of a car engine somewhere out of sight. Then I heard it. A humming, high and thin, like power lines in the wind. I looked up and saw them, electrical cables stretching from pole to pole, following the road, carrying current and signal into every home in the state. The humming grew louder, more distinct, shaping itself into syllables, into words, into a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. You can't outrun electricity, Casey. You can't outrun the modern world. We're in the wires. We're in the air. We're in the space between signals, and we've been waiting so long for someone to hear us. I started walking. Didn't know where I was going. Just away from the poles, away from the wires, toward the dense woods where maybe, just maybe, the signals couldn't reach. But as I walked, I could still hear the humming, still feel that presence, that attention, that vast and hungry awareness pressing against my mind. And somewhere in the static, I heard my grandmother's voice. "I'm sorry, Casey. I tried to warn you. But once they hear you, they never stop listening." Then she was gone, swallowed by the chorus of other voices, hundreds of them, thousands, all speaking at once, all saying my name, all waiting for me to answer. I kept walking into the woods, but I knew even then that I wasn't walking toward safety. I was walking toward Elena Vance. And whatever I found there would either save me or finish what the listeners had started. Elena Vance lived in a cabin at the end of a dirt road, 2 miles from the nearest power line. I found her address on a hand-drawn map at a general store. No computers, no GPS, just an old man behind the counter who knew everyone in the county and was happy to give directions to that strange woman who doesn't believe in electricity. He said it like a joke. I didn't laugh. The walk took almost 3 hours. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was setting and my legs burned from the uneven terrain. But the humming had faded somewhere around the first mile, the voices receding like a tide pulling back from shore. For the first time since that night in my apartment, my head felt quiet. The cabin was small, hand-built, with a wood-burning stove chimney sending thin smoke into the darkening sky. Solar panels on the roof, the only concession to modernity I could see. No phone lines, no cable, no wires connecting this place to the vast nervous system of the connected world. I knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid, eyes that assessed me with the sharpness of someone used to being approached by desperate strangers. "You heard them," she said. Not a question. "They won't stop. They're in everything. I can't. Come inside." The cabin was warm, lit by oil lamps and the glow of the wood stove. Books lined every wall, not just about parapsychology, but electrical engineering, signal theory, acoustic physics. Elena gestured to a chair by the fire and disappeared into a back room, returning with a kettle and 2 cups. "My mother spent 40 years trying to understand them," she said, pouring tea. She called them the listeners, but that's not quite right. They don't just listen, they feed. Every signal we send, every voice we transmit, every thought we put into words, it all becomes food for something that exists in the space between frequencies. What are they? we don't know. My mother thought they might be some kind of collective consciousness that evolved alongside electromagnetic technology. Others thought they were older than that, entities that existed in static before we even knew what static was, waiting for us to build the infrastructure they needed to reach us. She sat across from me, her face grave in the firelight. What we do know is that they're attracted to certain kinds of signals, emotional signals, pain, grief, guilt, anything that carries weight. When you speak those feelings into a device that's always listening, you're essentially broadcasting a beacon. I thought about all those nights in my apartment, all the questions I'd muttered about my grandmother, all the guilt I'd poured into the empty air. They used my grandmother's voice, said she forgives me. They use whatever hooks into you deepest, whatever will make you keep engaging, keep responding, keep feeding them attention. Elena's eyes softened slightly. It wasn't really her, Casey. They can mimic, they can echo, but they can't actually reach the dead. They just know which frequencies will hurt you most. How do I stop them? She was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the Vermont night pressed against the windows, deep and dark and mercifully silent. You can't stop them, not completely. Once they've locked onto you, that connection doesn't break. She held up a hand before I could speak. But you can go quiet. Starve the connection until it weakens. That's why I live here. No signals, no broadcasts, no way for them to reach me. My mother figured it out before she died. Complete electromagnetic isolation. It's the only thing that works. So I have to live like this forever? No phone, no computer, no contact with the modern world. That's one option, the slow option. Elena set down her tea. There's another way, faster but more dangerous. What is it? She stood and crossed to a shelf, pulling down a device that looked like something from another era, all dials and switches and exposed wiring. Handmade, clearly. The work of someone who understood technology on a level that went beyond ordinary engineering. My mother built this before she died. She called it a signal cage. It creates a localized electromagnetic null zone, a bubble where no signals can enter or exit. If you activate it while you're inside the field, it severs the connection, cuts the thread they've attached to you. That sounds perfect. Why didn't you just do that? Because it doesn't just cut their thread. Elena's voice dropped. It cuts all of them, every signal, every frequency, including the electrical signals in your own body. I stared at her. It would kill me. It would stop your heart for approximately 11 seconds. Long enough to break the connection, maybe long enough for someone to revive you afterward. She met my eyes. My mother never got the chance to test it. She was going to, but they found her first. Spoke to her through the solar inverter, the one piece of technology she'd kept. Distracted her long enough for her heart to give out on its own. The obituary said natural causes. The obituary said what the coroner could prove. Elena placed the device on the table between us. I've never used it because I've never been brave enough. I chose isolation instead. A half-life, cut off from everyone I ever knew. But you're young. You have more to lose. And they've already found you, which means isolation might not work forever. They're getting stronger, Casey. Every year, every new device, every new network, they grow. I looked at the device, at the switches and dials and the exposed wiring that might save me or might stop my heart permanently. If I do this and I survive, will they leave me alone? You'll be invisible to them, a dead frequency. They won't be able to hear you anymore. She paused. But you won't be able to hear them either. No technology, ever. One connected device, one moment of weakness, and the thread reforms. You'd have to live like I do. Off the grid, off the network, off the map. I thought about my life, my job, my friends, my sister, all the connections I'd built, all the conveniences I'd taken for granted. The idea of giving it all up, of disappearing into a silent world without screens or signals, felt like dying anyway. But then I thought about the voices, the humming in the wires. My grandmother's words twisted into something hungry and wrong. The feeling of being watched, being heard, being consumed by attention that would never, ever stop. Do it, I said. I'd rather die free than live as something they're feeding on. Elena nodded. She didn't argue, didn't try to talk me out of it. She just picked up the device, checked the settings, and told me to lie down on the floor near the fire. When I flip this switch, you'll have 11 seconds. Your heart will stop, the connection will break, and if I'm fast enough with the defibrillator, you'll come back. If I'm not, I understand. She positioned herself beside me, defibrillator paddles in hand. The device sat on her other side, its single switch gleaming in the firelight. Ready? I closed my eyes, thought about my grandmother, not the angry, confused woman at the end, but the one from before, the one who taught me to bake, who read me stories, who held me when I was scared. I hoped, wherever she really was, she knew I'd never meant to let her down. Ready. The switch flipped. The world went silent. Not quiet. Silent, in a way I'd never experienced. No hum of electricity, no whisper of distant signals, no static at the edge of hearing. Just nothing. And in that nothing, I felt the threads snap. Felt the listeners recoil, their attention suddenly cut off, their grip on my mind dissolving like smoke in wind. Then the pain came. Chest seizing, heart stopping, body shutting down in the absence of the electrical signals it needed to survive. I heard Elena counting, heard the whine of the defibrillator charging, felt the darkness closing in, thick and final and absolute. 3, 2, 1. The shock hit my chest like a hammer, and I came back. It's been 6 months now. I live in a cabin 3 miles from Elena's, in a valley where the mountains block most signals and the nearest cell tower is 40 miles away. I chop wood, I read books, I write letters by hand and mail them from a town that still has a post office. My sister thinks I joined a cult. My friends think I had a breakdown, but I'm alive, and I'm free, and when I lie awake at night, the only sounds I hear are wind and owls and the creak of settling wood. Sometimes I wonder about the listeners, about whether they're still out there, still growing, still feeding on the billions of voices that pour into devices every day. I wonder how many people have heard them without knowing what they were hearing. How many have opened doors without knowing what waited on the other side. I can't warn them, can't reach them. The moment I touch a connected device, the thread reforms and they'll find me again. But if you're reading this, if someone transcribed my handwritten pages and posted them online, the way I asked them to, I need you to understand something. Be careful what you say to the things that listen. Be careful what questions you ask the empty air. And if your smart speaker ever answers a question you didn't ask, unplug it. Throw it away. Run. Because once they hear you, they never stop listening. And there are so many of them now. So many. And they are so hungry. Story 3. The man who knocked on my window at a red light. The light at Garrison and 5th always takes forever. I've timed it. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Every single cycle. Long enough to check your phone, adjust the mirrors, sing along to half a song on the radio. Long enough that when you stop there late at night, with no other cars around and nothing but empty storefronts and flickering street lights, you start to feel like you're the last person left in the world. I was driving home from a double shift at the hospital. It was almost 2 a.m., that dead hour when even the bars have closed and the only people on the streets are the ones who have nowhere else to be. I was exhausted, the kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes your eyes feel like they're filled with sand. All I wanted was my bed, my pillow. 8 hours of unconsciousness before I had to do it all again. The light turned red just as I approached. Of course it did. I slowed to a stop, checked the intersection out of habit even though there wasn't another car in sight, and settled in to wait. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the corner, maybe 20 feet from my car. I hadn't noticed him at first. He was dressed in dark clothes, blending into the shadows between streetlights. But something made me look, some instinct that prickled at the back of my neck, and there he was, a man, perfectly still, facing my direction. I couldn't see his face. The angle was wrong, and the light was bad, and he was just far enough away that his features blurred into a pale smear above his dark collar. But I could tell he was looking at me. I could feel it, the way you can feel someone staring at you across a crowded room. I looked away, checked my phone, no messages, checked the light, still red, checked the clock, 2:07 a.m. When I looked back at the corner, the man was closer, not walking closer. He hadn't moved exactly, but the distance between us had shrunk. He was maybe 15 feet away now, still standing in that same rigid posture, still facing my car, still watching. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I told myself it was a trick of perception, that I'd misjudged the distance the first time, that tired eyes play tricks in the middle of the night. But my heart was beating faster now, and some animal part of my brain was whispering that something was wrong. The light was still red. 1 minute and 40 seconds to go if my timing was right. I looked at the man again, couldn't help it. He was closer still, 10 feet now, standing at the edge of the sidewalk, close enough that I could make out more details. His clothes were old, I realized, not just dark, but dated, like something from decades past. A wool coat with wide lapels, trousers that didn't quite fit right, shoes that might have been stylish in 1970, and his face. I could see it now, partially illuminated by the glow from my headlights. It was wrong. Not deformed, not injured, just wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The proportions were slightly off, the features arranged in a configuration that looked almost human but didn't quite add up. He smiled. A wide, slow smile that stretched too far across that wrong face. Then he stepped off the curb and walked toward my car. I should have run the light. I know that now. Should have gunned the engine and blown through the intersection and not looked back. But I was frozen, the way you freeze in nightmares, unable to move while something terrible approaches. He reached my window in 4 steps, stood there, inches from the glass, looking down at me. This close, I could see that his eyes were the wrong color, not any color I could name, something between gray and yellow that seemed to shift in the light. His smile hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown wider. He raised one hand and knocked on the window. 3 slow, deliberate taps, knuckles on glass, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. I found my voice. "What do you want?" He tilted his head. That wrong smile stretched wider still. "You stopped," he said. His voice was muffled through the glass, but I heard it clearly. Too clearly, like he was speaking directly into my ear. "Most people don't stop. They run the light. They keep driving. But you stopped. The light is red." "Yes." He nodded slowly, that exaggerated movement that made his head look like it was on a hinge. "The light is red, and you followed the rules. You did what you were supposed to do." He leaned closer. His breath fogged the window, and I saw that his teeth were wrong too. Too many of them, crowded together in that too wide mouth. "Yeah." "Do you know what happens to people who follow the rules? Who stop when they're supposed to stop?" I shook my head, couldn't speak. "They become available." He pressed one palm flat against the glass. "They become accessible. And once you're accessible, once you've made yourself available to things like me." The light turned green. I slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, tires squealing, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror, didn't look at the corner where he'd been standing. didn't look at anything except the road ahead and the speedometer climbing past 50, 60, 70 miles per hour on empty city streets. I made it home in 4 minutes, parked crooked in my driveway, ran to the door, locked every lock, and checked every window. Stood in my living room with my back against the wall, breathing hard, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The house stayed quiet. The night stayed dark. I told myself I'd imagined it. Told myself it was exhaustion, stress, some waking dream triggered by too many hours without sleep. I almost believed it. Then I looked at my car through the front window. There, on the driver's side, right where he'd pressed his palm against the glass, a handprint, but not on the outside of the window, on the inside, and underneath it, traced in the fog of breath that shouldn't have been there, 2 words, available now. I didn't sleep that night, sat in my living room with every light on, watching the windows, waiting for a knock that never came. But when the sun finally rose, I found something else. Something that made the handprint seem almost harmless by comparison. A note slipped under my front door, written in handwriting that looked like it had been scratched into the paper with a fingernail. You stopped once, you'll stop again, and next time, the light will stay red forever. I don't drive that route anymore. I don't drive at night at all, if I can help it. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed in the dark, I hear it. 3 slow knocks, and a voice, muffled but clear, asking if I'm available. I lasted 3 weeks before I had to drive at night again. The hospital doesn't care about your trauma. Shifts need to be covered, patients need to be treated, and when 2 nurses call out sick on the same evening, someone has to stay late. That someone was me, standing at the time clock at 1:47 a.m., punching out with hands that had already started to shake. I took a different route home, added 15 minutes to my commute, stuck to the main roads where other cars were more likely, avoided Garrison and 5th like it was radioactive. The drive was tense but uneventful. I made it home, locked the doors, checked the windows, and crawled into bed feeling like I'd won some small victory. The next morning, I found the note. Same paper, same scratched handwriting, slipped under my door while I slept. You can't change the route. You already stopped. You're already available. I called the police, told them someone was stalking me, leaving threatening messages, that I was scared for my safety. The officer who came to take my statement was sympathetic but skeptical. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of who had left the notes, no way to trace handwriting that looked more like claw marks than letters. "Have you considered it might be a prank?" he asked. "Maybe someone from work, someone who knows your schedule?" I didn't tell him about the man at the red light, didn't tell him about the handprint on the inside of my window or the face with too many teeth. I knew how it would sound. I knew what they would think. The officer left. I installed a security camera pointed at my front door. Bought new locks, better locks, the kind that cost $200 and came with guarantees about being unpickable. I told myself I was being proactive, taking control. That night, the knocking started. Not at my door, at my bedroom window on the 2nd floor. 3 slow taps, spaced exactly as they'd been at the red light. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound repeat. Tap, 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 then silence, then again, tap, tap, tap. I didn't look, couldn't look. Just lay there with my eyes squeezed shut, blankets pulled up to my chin like a child hiding from monsters, waiting for it to stop. It went on for an hour. Exactly an hour. I watched the clock the whole time, those red digital numbers the only thing I let myself see. At 3:17 a.m., the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. In the morning, I checked the camera footage from the front door. Nothing. No one had approached the house. No one had left a note. No one had been anywhere near my property between midnight and dawn. But when I looked at my bedroom window, I found the handprint. Same as before, on the inside of the glass, pressed there by a palm that couldn't have reached it. And beneath it, fogged into the surface like breath on a cold day. New words. I can reach you anywhere. Distance doesn't matter. You stopped. You're mine. I called out sick from work, spent the day researching, searching, trying to find anyone who'd experienced something similar. Most of what I found was useless. Creepypasta stories, urban legends, the kind of content designed to scare teenagers around campfires. But buried in a forum dedicated to unexplained encounters, I found a thread that made my blood freeze. The title was, "Has anyone else met the man at the red light?" The original post was from 4 years ago. A woman in Ohio driving home late at night had stopped at a red light and encountered a man who knocked on her window. She described his face, the wrong proportions, the too wide smile, the eyes that weren't quite the right color. She described the way he talked about availability, about people who follow the rules making themselves accessible. She described the notes, the handprints, the knocking that came in the middle of the night. Her last post was dated 3 months after the first. It was short, just 2 sentences. The light stayed red tonight. I don't think I'm going to make it home. There were no more posts after that. I searched her username across every platform I could find. Nothing. She'd vanished from the internet completely. But there were other responses in the thread. Other people who'd experienced the same thing in different cities, different states, different years. A truck driver in Nevada, a college student in Florida, a mother of 2 in Maine. All of them had stopped at red lights late at night. All of them had met the man with the wrong face. All of them had received the notes, the handprints, the knocking. And all of them had eventually stopped posting. I created an account, typed out my experience, my questions, my desperate hope that someone could tell me what this thing was and how to escape it. Before I could hit submit, my screen flickered. The forum disappeared. In its place was a single page, white background, black text. You're looking for answers in the wrong places. There are no answers. There's only the wait. The next time you stop, the light won't change. I slammed the laptop shut, sat there in my kitchen, heart pounding, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined it. That exhaustion and fear had combined to create a hallucination, a waking nightmare, something that could be explained by psychology instead of the supernatural. Then my phone buzzed, a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Just 3 words. Available. Accessible. Mine. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall, cracked, slid to the floor. I didn't pick it up, just sat there, shaking, listening to the silence of my empty house. Somewhere outside, a car drove past. I heard it slow at the end of my street, at the stop sign I passed every day on my way to work. I heard it stop, and then I heard the knock. Not at my window this time, not at my door. Inside my head. 3 slow taps, reverberating through my skull like someone was knocking on the inside of my thoughts. And a voice, that same muffled voice, whispering from somewhere that couldn't be anywhere. You're almost ready. 1 more stop. Just 1 more. I pressed my hands over my ears. It didn't help. The voice kept whispering, and outside, the car at the stop sign hadn't moved. I found Marcus Chen through the forum archives. He was the only one who'd posted more than a handful of times, the only one who seemed to have survived long enough to develop theories about what the man at the red light actually was. His posts spanned almost 2 years, detailed and increasingly desperate, documenting his attempts to escape something he called the claim. His last post had been 8 months ago, but unlike the others, he hadn't just vanished. He'd left a contact, a P.O. box, in a small town in New Mexico, with a note that said, "If you're reading this and you've met him, write to me. I might be able to help." I sent a letter that day. Handwritten because I didn't trust anything electronic anymore. I described my encounter, the notes, the knocking, the voice inside my head. I begged him to respond. 3 days later, my phone rang. I'd bought a new one, a burner, cash only, no connection to my name or my accounts. The number that appeared on the screen was blocked, I answered anyway. "You're the nurse from Portland." His voice was rough, exhausted, the voice of a man who hadn't slept properly in years. The one who stopped at Garrison and Fifth. "How did you know?" "He told me. He tells me everything now." A pause. "That's what happens when you're fully claimed. You become part of his network. You hear what he hears. You know what he knows." My hand tightened on the phone. "You're claimed? You belong to him?" "Not completely. Not yet. I've been fighting it for 2 years, ever since I stopped at a light in Tucson. But I can feel him inside me, getting stronger. And I can feel the others too. All the people he's taken, all the ones who stopped and stayed, stopped. What does he want? Why does he do this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more strained. "You know how traffic lights work, right? They're a system of control. Everyone agrees to follow the rules. Stop on red, go on green. It's one of the few things in modern life that everyone actually obeys, every single day, without questioning it. I don't understand." He feeds on obedience, on the act of stopping when you're told to stop. Every time someone waits at a red light, they're performing a tiny act of submission. Millions of people, billions of times a day, all agreeing to pause their lives because a colored light told them to. Marcus's breath was ragged now. Most of the time, it's nothing. Just a moment, and then the light changes, and you move on. But late at night, when the streets are empty and there's no reason to stop except the rule itself, that's when he can reach through. Reach through from where? I don't know. Somewhere else. Somewhere that exists in the pause, the gap, the space between stop and go. He lives there. And when someone stops and waits, really waits, obeys the rule even when there's no consequence for breaking it, they open a door, they make themselves available. I thought about that night. How I could have run the light. How there was no traffic, no cameras, no one to see. But I'd stopped anyway, because that's what you do. That's what the rule says. "How do I escape?" I asked. "The woman in Ohio, she disappeared. They all disappeared. But you're still here. How?" "I haven't driven in 18 months, haven't stopped at a light, haven't waited at a stop sign, haven't performed any act of traffic obedience. I live in the middle of nowhere, 5 miles from the nearest paved road. I thought if I removed myself from the system completely, he'd lose interest. Did it work?" The silence stretched out. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed. Flatter, emptier. He's patient. He doesn't need me to drive. He just needs me to stop, to pause, to wait for something that tells me when I'm allowed to move again. A sound that might have been a laugh. Do you know how many things in life work like traffic lights, crosswalk signals, elevator doors, the little spinning wheel on your computer when it's loading? Anything that makes you wait, anything that makes you pause and obey, he can use it. That's impossible. I stopped for an elevator last week. Just habit, just instinct. The doors were closing and I waited for them to open again instead of taking the stairs. 3 seconds. That's all it took. His voice dropped to a whisper. He's inside me now, deeper than before. I can feel him looking through my eyes, listening through my ears. And he's so happy, because now he can see you too. Now he knows exactly where you are, and exactly how scared you are, and exactly how long until you stop again. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to silence. Then I heard it, that knock, those 3 slow taps, not from outside this time, but from the phone itself, from the speaker, from somewhere inside the connection that was supposed to be severed. Marcus was so helpful. The voice was the same one from the red light, that muffled tone that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly into my brain. He found you for me, led me right to your new number, your new phone, your new attempts to hide. I threw the phone in the sink, turned on the water, drowned it, watched it spark and die. The voice kept talking anyway. You can't destroy what's already inside. You stopped, remember? You made yourself available, and every day since then, every time you've paused at a crosswalk or waited for a page to load or hesitated before opening a door, you've let me in a little deeper. I backed against the wall. The voice was coming from everywhere now, from the hum of the refrigerator, from the tick of the clock, from the silence between sounds. One more stop, that's all I need. One more moment of perfect obedience, and you'll be fully claimed, fully mine. You'll join the others, all the people who stopped when they should have kept going, all the good citizens who followed the rules and paid the price. The kitchen light flickered, red like a traffic signal, like a warning, like a command. And the beautiful thing is, you can't help it. It's instinct. It's training. Society spent your whole life teaching you to stop when you're told to stop. The light flickered again. Red, red, red. So go ahead. Try to keep moving. Try to never pause, never wait, never obey. The voice laughed, a wet, wrong sound that came from inside my own chest. We both know you can't. We both know it's only a matter of time. The light turned green. And I stood there, frozen, unable to move. Stopped. I tried to live without stopping. It sounds simple until you actually attempt it. I quit my job. Couldn't risk the commute. Couldn't risk the traffic lights and stop signs and crosswalks that punctuated every route to the hospital. I had savings, enough to last a few months if I was careful. Enough time to figure out how to escape something that had crawled inside me through a moment of ordinary obedience. I stopped using elevators, stopped waiting for microwaves to beep, stopped pausing at doors to see if someone else was coming through. I kept moving, always moving, a constant state of motion that left me exhausted but felt like the only way to starve the thing that was feeding on my stillness. For 11 days, it almost worked. The voice faded to a whisper. The knocking came less frequently. The handprints stopped appearing on my windows. I started to believe that Marcus had been right, that if I could just remove myself from the system of stops and pauses that governed modern life, the claim would weaken. The door I'd opened would slowly close. Then the mail came. I was walking to the kitchen, not stopping, not pausing, when I heard the clatter of the mail slot. Instinct took over. I turned toward the sound, hesitated, waited to see what had been delivered. 3 seconds, maybe less. But it was enough. The voice returned full force, roaring through my skull like a train through a tunnel. I collapsed against the wall, hands over my ears, screaming at nothing. The lights in the house flickered, red, green, and I heard that wet laugh echoing from every surface. You waited, the voice said. You paused to see what the mail would bring. Such a small thing, such a human thing. It wasn't... I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter, only the action, only the stop. The flickering intensified, strobing now, painting the hallway in alternating colors. You're so close now, so ready. One more and you'll be complete. One more and you'll join the network forever. I scrambled to my feet, ran through the house, not stopping, not pausing, bursting out the back door into the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Red. Everything was red. You can't run forever, the voice said. It was outside now, coming from the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant traffic, the chirp of birds settling in for the night. You have to sleep eventually. And what is sleep but the longest pause of all? I hadn't thought about that, hadn't considered that every night. For hours at a time, I stopped completely. Stopped moving, stopped thinking, stopped being conscious. The ultimate act of waiting. That's why it's taking so long, the voice continued, almost gentle now. Most people, I claim in their sleep, they stop at a red light, And that night, while they're lying still in their beds, I finish the work. But you've been fighting, waking up before I can complete the process, thrashing in your dreams like you know something is wrong. I thought about the nightmares I'd been having, the ones where I was stuck at an intersection, surrounded by red lights in every direction, unable to move while something approached from the shadows. You've been so strong, so resistant, but strength fades. Resistance crumbles, and eventually, tonight, tomorrow, next week, you'll sleep deeply enough that I can finally claim what's already mine. I spent that night walking circles in my backyard. When exhaustion threatened to pull me under, I splashed cold water on my face, did jumping jacks, pinched myself hard enough to leave bruises. Anything to keep moving. Anything to avoid the stillness that would let him in. By dawn, I was hallucinating, seeing red lights in the corners of my vision, hearing engines that weren't there, feeling the phantom sensation of a seatbelt across my chest. My body was shutting down, demanding the rest I couldn't afford to give it. I made it until noon before I collapsed. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke, I was lying on the grass, the sun directly overhead, my body aching from the awkward position. For a moment, everything was quiet, peaceful. I thought maybe I'd made it through. Maybe I'd beaten him by keeping the sleep too short, too shallow, too restless for him to work. Then I tried to move. I couldn't. My body was frozen, not paralyzed, not numb, but locked in place like a car at an intersection. I could feel everything, could see everything, but I couldn't move a single muscle. Couldn't blink, couldn't breathe deeply, couldn't do anything but lie there and wait. Wait. The word echoed in my head with terrible significance. There it is. The voice was clearer now, more present than it had ever been. The final stop. Not a red light, not a crosswalk, just your own body, paused in the middle of living, waiting for permission to continue. I screamed inside my skull, thrashed against the invisible restraints that held me motionless. Nothing worked. Nothing moved. This is how it ends for everyone. The external stops are just the beginning, the training, the conditioning, teaching your body what obedience feels like. But the final claim happens here, in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths. I felt something shift inside me, something settling into place, making itself at home in the gaps between my thoughts. You're mine now, fully claimed, fully accessible. The voice was inside me now, indistinguishable from my own internal monologue. And soon, you'll help me claim others. You'll stand at intersections late at night, knock on windows, remind the obedient ones what they've made themselves available for. No, I wouldn't. I'd fight, I'd resist, That's what they all say. Marcus said it too, before he started making phone calls for me. The woman from Ohio said it before she started leaving notes. They all think they'll resist. They all think they're different. I felt my fingers twitch. Movement, finally, but not mine. Something else was operating my body, testing the controls, learning how to make me move. But obedience is a habit, and you've been practicing your whole life. My hand rose, slowly, mechanically, reached toward the sky like I was signaling something, like I was hailing a cab or waving someone down or telling them to stop. "Welcome to the network," the voice said. And now it was my voice too, speaking from my throat without my permission. "Welcome to forever." My body stood up, brushed off the grass, started walking toward the street. And somewhere deep inside, in the tiny space that was still me, I screamed into a void that no one could hear. I'm still screaming. It's been 4 months since he finished claiming me, and I haven't stopped screaming for a single second. Not out loud. My voice belongs to him now, just like my hands and my legs and my face that smiles too wide when I approach a car window. But inside, in the shrinking pocket of consciousness he allows me to keep, I scream constantly into a darkness that swallows every sound. He lets me watch. That's the cruelest part. He could have erased me completely, absorbed my awareness into the collective hum of the network. Instead, he keeps me present, keeps me watching through eyes I can't control as my body does his work. I stand at intersections now, late at night, when the streets are empty, when the only people driving are the exhausted and the desperate and the ones who follow rules even when no one's watching. I wait in the shadows until someone stops at a red light, and then I walk forward. I knock on their window. I smile that wrong smile with my wrong face, and I tell them they've made themselves available. Some of them drive away, gun the engine, run the light, disappear into the night. Those ones escape, for now. He can't claim the ones who don't obey, the ones who break the rules and keep moving. I feel something like relief when they go, a tiny spark of hope in the void where myself used to live. But most of them stay. Most of them wait, because that's what you do at a red light, because that's what they've been taught since they were children. Stop means stop. Red means wait. And while they're waiting, while they're obeying, I lean close to their window and I whisper the things he tells me to whisper. You're available now. You're accessible. The light might change, but I'll find you again. Then I slip a note under their windshield wiper, step back into the shadows, watch them drive away with terror in their eyes and a mark on their souls that will never wash off. The network grows every week. I can feel them, all the claimed ones, spread across the country, standing at intersections and crosswalks and stop signs. We're connected now, linked by the thing that lives in the pause between stopping and going. I feel Marcus in Nevada, his consciousness as trapped as mine, his body working a truck stop near the interstate where weary drivers pull over to rest. I feel the woman from Ohio. She didn't disappear. She was just reassigned, sent to a small town in Georgia where she haunts a railroad crossing. We're everywhere, every city, every state, every place where lights turn red and people obey. And we're always recruiting, always growing, always looking for the ones who follow the rules. Sometimes I recognize the people I approach. A co-worker from the hospital driving home after a late shift. A neighbor I used to wave to, stopped at the intersection near our street. They don't recognize me. My face has changed too much, twisted into something that looks almost human but doesn't quite add up. But I recognize them, and I feel something shatter inside when I knock on their window and watch the fear bloom in their eyes. He could have made this painless, could have let me fade away, become nothing more than a puppet with no one inside to witness the strings. But suffering is part of the system. Our anguish feeds him just like obedience does. The despair of the claimed, the terror of the marked, the creeping dread of everyone who's ever stopped at a red light and felt, just for a moment, like something was watching. I've learned things in these 4 months of captivity, learned the rules of his existence, the boundaries of his power, the small gaps in his attention that might offer escape. He can only claim the obedient, the rule followers, the law abiders, the ones who stop when they're told to stop, people who run red lights, who ignore stop signs, who refuse to wait for anything. They're invisible to him. Their disobedience makes them inaccessible, unopenable, doors that can't be unlocked, and the claimed can be released. I've seen it happen once, felt the shockwave through the network when someone broke free. A man in Texas, claimed for almost a year, suddenly gone from our collective awareness. He'd been in a car accident, a real one, not staged. The impact had stopped his heart for almost a minute, and when they revived him, the claim was broken. The pause of death had reset something, severed the connection, closed the door that obedience had opened. I think about that a lot, in the moments between assignments. Death is escape. Cessation is freedom. If I could stop my own heart, If I could pause in a way he didn't control, maybe I could break free too. But I can't. My body isn't mine anymore. I can't choose to stop breathing. Can't will my heart to cease. The only stops I'm allowed are the ones he commands, standing at intersections, waiting in shadows, pausing outside windows until the moment is right. I'm writing this in the only way I can. He lets me think, lets me form words in the prison of my mind, because my suffering entertains him. And sometimes, when his attention is elsewhere, I can push those words outward, scratch them onto paper with hands that tremble against his control, leave them in places where someone might find them. If you're reading this, I need you to understand something. Don't stop. I know it goes against everything you've been taught. I know the rules say, wait at red lights, pause at stop signs, obey the signals that control the flow of traffic. But the rules were written by people who didn't know what lives in the spaces between stop and go. Run the red lights. Ignore the stop signs. Keep moving. Always moving. Even when every instinct tells you to pause. And if you're driving late at night on an empty street and someone knocks on your window, don't look. Don't roll down the glass. Don't stop to see what they want. Just drive, because we're out there. Thousands of us now, growing every night. And we're so hungry. I'm so hungry. He's turning my attention toward the street now. There's a car approaching, slowing for the light that just turned red. A young woman behind the wheel, tired, distracted, obeying the rules like she's been taught. My body is moving. My feet are carrying me toward the intersection. My hand is rising, preparing to knock. I'm screaming inside, begging her to run the light, begging her to drive away before I reach her window. But she's stopping. She's waiting. And the light at Garrison and 5th takes forever to change. Story 4. The hospital room with no assigned patient. Room 714 was always empty. I noticed it my first week on the 7th floor, back when I was still learning the layout, still memorizing which supply closet had the extra IV bags and which elevator actually worked after midnight. Saint-Germain Memorial was an old hospital, built in the 1940s, renovated piecemeal over the decades, a maze of additions and annexes that didn't quite line up. The kind of place where you could work for years and still discover hallways you'd never seen before. The 7th floor was long-term care, patients who weren't dying but weren't getting better either, stroke recovery, chronic conditions, the slow and grinding illnesses that keep people hospitalized for months at a time. It was quieter than the ER, less urgent than the ICU, but it had its own weight, its own particular sadness. My first night shift, I did rounds with Denise, the charge nurse who'd been on 7 for almost 20 years. She walked me through every room, introduced me to the patients, explained the quirks and preferences that wouldn't be in any chart. Mr. Patterson in 702 liked his water with ice, no straw. Mrs. Okonkwo in 709 needed her blinds closed exactly halfway, or she couldn't sleep. Little things that made the difference between adequate care and actual comfort. We passed 714 without stopping. "What about that one?" I asked, nodding toward the closed door. Denise didn't slow down. "Storage," she said. "Overflow equipment. Don't worry about it." I might have believed her, except for 2 things. First, the door had a patient room number on it, 714, in the same brass fixtures as every other room on the floor. Storage rooms had different labels, different doors. Second, as we walked past, I heard something from inside. A cough. Weak and wet, the kind of cough you hear from patients with fluid in their lungs. I stopped. "Did you hear that?" Denise was already 5 feet ahead of me. She turned, and something flickered across her face, something that might have been fear or might have been warning. "I didn't hear anything," she said. "Come on. Mrs. Chen needs her midnight meds." I followed her. What else could I do? I was new, uncertain, already overwhelmed by the 1,000 small details of a job I wasn't sure I could handle. I told myself I'd misheard. Sound carried strangely in old buildings. Pipes gurgled, vents wheezed. A cough could have come from anywhere. But over the next few weeks, I kept noticing things about room 714. The door was always closed. Every other room on the floor had doors that stood open during the day, closed only at night or when a patient needed privacy. But 714 was shut tight, always, at every hour. I never saw anyone go in or come out. The room didn't appear on our assignment sheets. I checked, after my conversation with Denise. The 7th floor had rooms 701 through 720, minus 714. The charts skipped right over it, like it didn't exist. When I mentioned this to one of the other nurses, she just shrugged and said some rooms were offline for maintenance. It happened, but the light under the door was always on. I saw it every night during my rounds, that thin strip of yellow glow seeping out from under the threshold. And sometimes, when the hallway was quiet and I was passing by alone, I heard sounds from inside. Coughing, breathing, the soft rustle of sheets. Once I could have sworn I heard someone crying. I asked Denise about it again, a month into my employment. We were at the nurses' station, catching up on charting during a rare quiet moment. Room 714, I said. What's really in there? She didn't look up from her computer. I told you. Storage. Storage doesn't cough. Storage doesn't have the light on at 3 a.m. Her hands stopped moving on the keyboard. She sat very still for a moment, her face unreadable. Some advice, she said quietly. Don't ask about 714. Don't talk about 714. Don't go near 714 unless you absolutely have to. That room is not your concern, and the more attention you pay to it, the worse things get. Worse how? She finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired, haunted, the eyes of someone who'd seen things she couldn't explain and had decided long ago to stop trying. Just trust me, please. I wanted to push, wanted to demand answers, to insist on an explanation for the room that wasn't a room, the patient who wasn't a patient. But something in her expression stopped me. Denise had been doing this job for 2 decades. She'd seen everything the 7th floor had to offer, deaths and recoveries, miracles and tragedies, the whole spectrum of human suffering. If she was scared of room 714, maybe I should be too. So I stopped asking, stopped paying attention, or tried to. Did my rounds, cared for my patients, walked past that closed door without looking. It worked for almost 3 months. Then came the night of March 15th. I was working a double, covering for a colleague whose kid was sick. By 2 a.m. I was running on caffeine and stubbornness, making my rounds on autopilot, checking vitals and adjusting IVs without really thinking about what I was doing. I was passing 714 when the door opened. Not all the way. Just a crack, maybe 2 inches. Enough to let that yellow light spill into the hallway. Enough to let me see a sliver of what was inside. A hospital bed, same as any other on the floor. White sheets, metal rails, the standard equipment clustered around it. And in the bed, barely visible through that narrow gap, a figure. Someone was lying there. I could see the shape of them under the blankets, the outline of a body, the dark spot where a head rested on a pillow. Hello? My voice came out as a whisper. Do you need help? The figure moved, just slightly, just a shift in the sheets, but enough to tell me they were awake. They were listening. Then a hand reached out from under the blankets, pale, thin, with fingers that looked too long. It gripped the bed rail, and I heard a sound, that same wet cough I'd heard my first night, louder now, closer. The hand lifted, beckoned me forward. Come in, the gesture said. Come closer. I need you. I should have run, should have walked away, found Denise, pretended I'd never seen anything. But I was exhausted, and the instinct to help was stronger than the instinct to flee. I was a nurse. Someone needed me. I pushed open the door. The room was empty. No bed, no patient, no equipment. just a bare floor and bare walls and a window that looked out onto nothing but darkness. The light I'd seen, there was no source for it, no fixture, no lamp, just emptiness. I stood in the doorway, trying to understand what I was seeing. I'd watched a hand reach toward me. I'd heard a cough. I'd seen... The door slammed shut behind me, and in the darkness, something started breathing. I couldn't see it. The room was pitch black now. That sourceless light had vanished the moment the door closed, leaving me in a darkness so complete I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. But I could hear it, breathing, slow and labored, the wet rattle of lungs that weren't working right. It came from somewhere ahead of me, somewhere in the center of the room that shouldn't have been empty, but was. Somewhere a patient wasn't lying, but somehow still existed. I fumbled for the door behind me, found the handle, twisted it, pushed. It didn't move. Not locked, just stuck. Like something was holding it from the other side, like the hospital itself had decided I wasn't allowed to leave. "Help!" I pounded on the door, the sound swallowed by the darkness. "Someone! I'm trapped in 714. The breathing changed, grew louder, closer, accompanied by another sound. The rustle of sheets, the creak of bed springs, the soft friction of a body moving across fabric. Something was getting up. "Please." I didn't know if I was talking to whoever was in the room or to whoever might be outside. "Please, I need to get out." A voice answered. Not from the hallway, from inside the room, from the darkness in front of me. "You came in." It was barely a whisper, dry and cracked, the voice of someone who hadn't spoken in years, whose throat had forgotten how to form words. "You came in on your own. No one made you. You opened the door." I thought someone needed help. My back was pressed against the door now, hands still gripping the handle. "I'm a nurse. I heard. I saw." "You saw what I wanted you to see." The breathing was closer now. I could feel it, not just hear it, but feel the faint displacement of air against my face. "You heard what I needed you to hear, and now you're here, in my room." "This isn't a room. It's empty. There's nothing. There's me." A hand touched my face. Cold. So cold it burned, fingers that felt like ice wrapped in papery skin. They traced down my cheek, across my jaw, came to rest against my throat. Not squeezing, just touching, feeling. "So warm," the voice whispered. "So alive. It's been so long since someone alive came into my room." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The hand on my throat pulsed with cold, and I felt something draining out of me. Not blood, not breath, but something deeper, something essential. "What are you?" I managed. "I was a patient, once, a long time ago." The hand moved, fingers walking up my jaw to press against my temple. I was sick for so long. Years and years in this room, watching the ceiling, waiting for someone to help me. But no one ever did. No one ever came. "That's not... The hospital wouldn't." "The hospital forgot me." The voice hardened, bitterness cutting through the dry whisper. "Lost my paperwork, misplaced my chart. I became a room with no assigned patient. No name, no diagnosis, no one responsible for my care. I lay here and I suffered and I died, and no one even noticed." The cold spread from her fingers into my skull. I saw flashes, images that weren't mine, memories that belonged to someone else. A woman, middle-aged, lying in a hospital bed. Days passing without visitors, nurses walking by without stopping, a call button that no one answered, no matter how many times she pressed it. Dying alone, dying forgotten, dying in a room that the system had decided was empty. "I'm sorry." The words came out without me deciding to say them. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." Sorry doesn't help. Sorry doesn't change anything. The hand withdrew from my temple, but the cold remained, spreading through my body like frost through veins. But you can help. You can change things. How? Stay with me. The breathing was right in my ear now, the whisper intimate and terrible. Be my nurse. Take care of me the way no one did when I was alive. Visit me every night, check my vitals, make sure I'm comfortable, do the job you were supposed to do. I can't. You're not alive. I can't treat someone who... Then I'll take what I need. The cold intensified, searing now, burning through my chest like frostbite. Warmth, life, company. I'll drain it from you piece by piece, night after night, until there's nothing left, until you're as empty as this room, as forgotten as me. The door flew open, light flooded in, harsh fluorescent hallway light that made me cry out and cover my eyes. Hands grabbed me, pulled me backward, dragged me out of the room and into the corridor. I've got you, Denise's voice, shaking but firm. I've got you. You're okay. You're out. I collapsed against the wall, gasping, shivering despite the warmth of the hallway. My skin felt wrong, too cold, too tight, like I'd been in a freezer for hours instead of minutes. When I looked at my hands, the fingertips were white, bloodless, the first signs of frostbite. Denise was staring at the door to 714. It had closed again the moment I was through, that thin line of yellow light once again visible beneath it. I told you, she said quietly. I told you not to go in. I saw. There was someone in there. There's always someone in there. That's the problem. She helped me to my feet, supported me as we walked toward the nurse's station. Come on. We need to get you warmed up, and then I need to tell you what you've gotten yourself into. She sat me down, wrapped me in heated blankets, made me drink hot coffee that I could barely taste. The other nurses on shift gave us space. I saw them glancing at me with expressions I couldn't read. Fear, pity, recognition. How many? I asked. How many people has she taken? None completely. Not yet. Denise sat across from me, her own hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. But she's tried. Everyone who stays on this floor long enough, she reaches out to eventually. The new ones, the curious ones, the ones who hear her and can't help but investigate. What happened to them? Some transferred to other floors, some quit entirely, a few. She hesitated. A few got too close, went in too many times. They're still here, technically, still employed. But there's something missing in them now, something she took that never came back. I thought about the cold I'd felt, the draining sensation like something vital being siphoned away. She wants me to come back. She said I could be her nurse. Denise's face went pale. She talked to you? Actually spoke? Yes, why? Doesn't she always? She hasn't spoken to anyone in almost 8 years. Denise set down her cup. Her hands were trembling. The last person she spoke to was a resident named Michael Chen. He went into that room every night for 2 weeks. What happened to him? Denise didn't answer. She just looked at me with those tired, haunted eyes. And I understood that whatever had happened to Michael Chen, she was afraid it was going to happen to me. I found Michael Chen's file in the hospital archives. It took 3 days of searching, 3 days of pretending to need old records for legitimate reasons, 3 days of feeling that cold spot in my chest where something had been taken and not yet returned. But I found him. Dr. Michael Chen, resident physician, assigned to the 7th floor from September 2015 to February 2016. His file was thin, a hiring record, performance reviews, a few commendations for his work with long-term patients. And then, abruptly, nothing. No termination paperwork, no transfer request, no resignation letter, just a final note, dated February 23rd, 2016. Patient in room 714 has been stabilized. Continuing observation. There was no patient in room 714. There hadn't been a patient in room 714 since 1987, according to the records I'd pulled. The room had been decommissioned after a series of unexplained incidents, equipment malfunctions, staff complaints, a string of patients who'd been assigned there and subsequently deteriorated for no medical reason. The last official patient was a woman named Eleanor Vance, admitted in 1984 with a chronic respiratory condition, died in 1987, 3 years later, of complications that should have been treatable. Her chart noted that she'd been difficult, refusing to cooperate with nurses, complaining constantly, becoming increasingly agitated in her final months. She'd died alone. According to the death certificate, her body wasn't discovered for almost 16 hours. No one had checked on her. No one had answered her call button. She'd simply slipped through the cracks. I understood now why she was so angry, why she wanted someone to take care of her. She'd spent 3 years dying by inches, ignored and forgotten, and the hospital had let it happen. But understanding didn't make me any safer. The cold hadn't gone away. It lived in my chest now, a permanent frost that no amount of heated blankets or hot coffee could touch. I felt it most strongly at night during my shifts, when I walked past room 714 and felt something on the other side of that door reaching for me. She was calling me, not with words, not yet, but with a pull I couldn't explain, a gravity that drew my attention to that closed door every time I passed, that made my feet slow without my permission, that whispered in the back of my mind, come back, you promised to take care of me." I hadn't promised anything, but she didn't seem to care about that distinction. A week after my encounter, I started seeing her outside the room. The first time was in the supply closet. I was reaching for a box of gauze when I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a shape, pale and indistinct, standing in the corner. When I turned to look, nothing was there, just shadows and shelves and the fluorescent flicker of a dying bulb. The second time was in the elevator. The doors opened on the 7th floor, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw a woman standing in the hallway, hospital gown, bare feet, lank hair hanging around a face I couldn't quite make out. Then I blinked, and she was gone. The third time, she was in a patient's room. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds, checking on Mrs. Patterson in 702. The old woman was asleep, breathing steady, everything normal. But as I was adjusting her blankets, I felt that cold spike in my chest, and I looked up to see Eleanor standing at the foot of the bed. She was clearer now than she'd been in the hallway. I could see the details of her, the sunken cheeks, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hospital gown hung off bones that were too sharp. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd spent years wasting away, dying slowly in a room no one cared about. "You haven't come back," she said. I couldn't answer. My voice was frozen, locked in my throat along with everything else. "I've been waiting. Every night, I wait for you to open the door." She moved around the bed, and I noticed she wasn't walking exactly, more gliding, her feet an inch above the floor. "But you don't come. You walk past, and you don't come in." "I can't," I managed. I can't help you." "You could try." She was closer now, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating off her like she was made of ice. No one ever tried. They just walked past, day after day, year after year. I called for them and they didn't come. I pressed the button and nobody answered. Mrs. Patterson stirred in her sleep, made a small sound, a whimper of discomfort, and I saw her face tighten like she was having a bad dream. "Leave her alone," I said. "She's not part of this. Everyone on this floor is part of this. Everyone who lies in a bed and waits for someone to take care of them." Eleanor's eyes, I could see them now, hollow and dark and filled with something that might have been madness or might have been grief, fixed on the sleeping woman. They're all so fragile, so dependent, so easy to forget. I won't forget them. I'm their nurse. I take care of them. The way you took care of me. You weren't my patient. I wasn't even born when you... Someone should have taken care of me. Her voice rose, cracked, echoed in a way that couldn't have been natural. Someone should have answered when I called. Someone should have noticed when I stopped breathing. But no one did. No one cared. And now, no one gets to leave this floor without understanding what that feels like. The cold intensified. I felt it spreading from my chest into my arms, my legs, my fingers and toes. Mrs. Patterson's monitor started beeping, heart rate dropping, oxygen levels falling, vital signs that had been stable for weeks suddenly plummeting. "Stop it," I gasped. "Please, she's innocent." So was I. I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped between Eleanor and the bed, put myself directly in her path, let the full force of that cold pour into me instead of into my patient. It was like being submerged in ice water. My vision went white, my lungs seized, my heart stuttered in my chest. I felt her inside me, her rage, her loneliness, her endless, bottomless need for someone to acknowledge that she existed. And underneath all of that, buried so deep I almost missed it, I felt her pain, the real pain, the original wound, not anger, not vengeance. Just a woman who'd been sick and scared and alone, who'd died wondering why no one came, who'd spent decades haunting a room because she couldn't let go of the question that had defined her final years. Why didn't anyone help me? "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor." The cold stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Mrs. Patterson's monitor stabilized. The room warmed. Eleanor stood in front of me, close enough to touch, her hollow eyes searching my face for something I couldn't name. "You said my name," she said. "Yes. No one's said my name in 30 years. And then she was gone, vanished like smoke in sunlight, leaving nothing behind but a fading chill and the echo of a voice that had spent too long waiting to be heard. I stood there for a long time, listening to Mrs. Patterson breathe, wondering if I just made things better or infinitely worse. It got worse. Eleanor didn't disappear after that night. If anything, saying her name had made her stronger, more present, more real. She appeared every shift now, in doorways, in mirrors, in the dark spaces between rooms, always watching me, always waiting. And she started talking, not demands anymore, not threats, just conversation. She would appear beside me while I was charting and comment on my handwriting. She would materialize in the break room while I was eating and ask about my family. She would follow me on rounds, hovering at my shoulder, whispering observations about patients like she was teaching me, mentoring me, showing me how to be a better nurse. "Mr. Rodriguez's color is off," she'd say. "Check his oxygen. He's not getting enough air." And she'd be right. I'd check, and his O2 levels would be dropping, and I'd catch a problem hours before it would have become critical. "Mrs. Kim is in pain. She won't tell you because she doesn't want to be a burden. But look at her hands. She's gripping the sheets. She needs more medication." Right again. Every time. Eleanor knew things about the patients that I couldn't explain, saw symptoms I missed, caught problems before they became emergencies. She was helping me in her way, making me a better nurse. But the cold never went away. It deepened every night, spreading through my body like slow-moving ice. I started wearing extra layers under my scrubs, started drinking coffee constantly, desperately, trying to warm myself from the inside. Nothing worked. The chill was part of me now, a permanent reminder that Eleanor had taken something that first night and was taking more every time she appeared. Denise noticed. Of course, she noticed. She'd been watching for it, waiting for the signs she'd seen before. "You need to transfer," she told me, pulling me aside after a shift. "Request a move to another floor. Get away from her before it's too late. She's helping me. The patients. She's feeding on you." Denise's grip on my arm was painful. That's what she does. She finds someone who cares, someone who wants to help, and she latches on, makes herself useful, makes herself necessary, and all the while she's draining you, taking your warmth, your energy, your life. What happened to Michael Chen? Denise's face went still. I told you. He went into her room every night for 2 weeks. But what happened to him? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph. Old, faded, the colors washed out with time. It showed a young man in a white coat, smiling, full of the optimism that comes with being new to medicine. "This was Michael," she said. "First week on the floor." She turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written, "Michael Chen, 7/14, February 2016. "He's still there," she said quietly. "In the room, with her. He went in one night and didn't come out. We filed a missing person report, but they never found him. Officially, he disappeared. But I've heard him sometimes, through the door, coughing." I thought about the breathing I'd heard my first night, the wet, labored sound of lungs that weren't working right. "She didn't kill him," Denise continued. "That would have been kinder. She kept him, made him her patient, since no one would let her be ours. He's been in that room for 8 years, alive but not alive, taken care of by something that doesn't understand what care actually means." I felt sick, felt the cold in my chest pulse with something that might have been Eleanor's satisfaction. "She wants me," I said. "Doesn't she? She's been grooming me this whole time. She wants someone to stay, someone to be with her forever, the way no one was when she was dying. And you," Denise's voice cracked, "you said her name. You acknowledged her. That's more than anyone's done in decades." That night, Eleanor was waiting for me when I arrived for my shift. She looked different, more solid, more present, less like a ghost and more like a woman. Her hospital gown was cleaner. Her hair was combed. She almost looked healthy if you didn't look too closely at the eyes, at the way the light passed through her at certain angles. "You know," she said, "about Michael." I didn't answer. Walked past her toward the nurse's station, trying to ignore the way the cold intensified with every step. "He was kind too, like you. He wanted to help." She followed me, gliding, that perpetual inch above the floor. But he tried to leave. After he understood what I needed, he tried to transfer to another floor. I couldn't let him do that. "So you trapped him, imprisoned him in your room forever." "I'm taking care of him." Her voice sharpened, defensive. "The way no one took care of me. He has someone now, someone who checks on him, who talks to him, who never leaves him alone. That's not care. That's captivity." "What's the difference?" She moved in front of me, blocking my path. Her face was inches from mine, and I could see the desperation behind the anger, the loneliness that no amount of stolen company could fill. When I was dying, I would have given anything for someone to stay. Anyone. Even someone who didn't want to be there. At least I wouldn't have been alone. "You're still alone," I said quietly. "Michael didn't choose you. He's not your friend or your family or your nurse. He's your prisoner. And prisoners don't care about their captors, Eleanor. They just wait for a chance to escape." Something flickered in her hollow eyes. Doubt, maybe, or recognition. "I could make you stay," she whispered. "Right now. I could take enough of your warmth that you'd never leave this floor. You'd be mine forever, just like him." "You could." I didn't back away, didn't show fear. "But then you'd have 2 prisoners instead of 1. 2 people who resent you, who hate you, who'd leave the moment they found a way out. Is that what you want? More people counting the seconds until they can escape?" She didn't answer. Her form flickered, destabilized, the edges going fuzzy like a television losing signal. "Or," I said, "you could let me help you. Really help you. Not as a prisoner, As a nurse, the flickering stopped. Those hollow eyes fixed on mine, and for the first time since I'd met her, Eleanor Vance looked uncertain. "How?" she asked. "Let me find out what happened to you. Let me tell your story. Let me make sure you're not forgotten again." I took a breath, felt the cold pulse in my chest, and made a decision that might have been brave or might have been suicidal. "And if I do that, if I give you what you actually need, you let Michael go." Eleanor was silent for a long time. Behind her, down the hall, the door to room 714 stood closed, its strip of yellow light glowing like a wound. "Find out what happened," she finally said. "Show me that someone remembers, and then we'll talk about what I'm willing to let go." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and it was the only chance Michael Chen had. I spent 2 weeks piecing together Eleanor Vance's life. It wasn't easy. 37 years is a long time, and most of the people who'd known her were dead or gone. But I found fragments, old employment records, a faded obituary in a newspaper archive, a nursing home in Delaware where her sister had lived until 2019. The sister had left behind papers, letters mostly, written to Eleanor during her hospitalization. The nursing home director let me look through them. Didn't ask why I was so interested in correspondence addressed to a woman who'd been dead for almost 4 decades. The letters told a story that made my chest ache with something other than cold. Eleanor had been a librarian, 42 years old when she got sick, unmarried, no children, living alone in a small apartment filled with books. Her sister Margaret had been her only family, but Margaret lived on the other side of the country and couldn't travel easily. So she wrote letters instead, every week, telling Eleanor about her life, asking about the treatment, promising to visit as soon as she could. The letters stopped in early 1987. The last one was dated February 3rd, almost 2 months before Eleanor died. I found out why in the hospital's administrative records. A filing error had changed Eleanor's status from active patient to discharged in the system. Her room disappeared from the nursing rotations. Her chart was archived. For the final months of her life, Eleanor Vance existed in a bureaucratic limbo, physically present but administratively invisible. The letters from Margaret had been returned to sender, patient discharged, no forwarding address. Eleanor had died, thinking her sister had abandoned her, had stopped writing, stopped caring, stopped remembering. She'd spent her final weeks alone and confused, wondering why the woman who'd written every week for 3 years had suddenly gone silent. I made copies of everything, the letters, the records, the error that had erased her from the hospital's awareness. I documented every failure, every oversight, every small cruelty that had accumulated into her complete abandonment. Then I went to room 714. The door was open when I arrived, not a crack this time, wide open, yellow light spilling into the hallway, inviting me in. I could see the room as it must have looked in 1987, a hospital bed, monitoring equipment, a chair by the window where visitors would have sat if any visitors had come. Eleanor stood by the bed, and next to her, sitting in the chair, was a man I recognized from an 8-year-old photograph. Michael Chen looked terrible, thin and pale, his white coat hanging off skeletal shoulders, his eyes hollow in a way that reminded me of Eleanor herself. He was alive. I could see his chest rising and falling, but just barely, just enough. "You came back," Eleanor said. "I found out what happened." I held up the folder of documents. "Your sister never stopped writing. The hospital made a mistake, a filing error that made everyone think you'd been discharged. Her letters were returned. She thought you'd been sent home. She didn't know you were still here." Eleanor's form flickered. "What?" "She wrote to you every week until the day you died. Look." I opened the folder, spread the letters across the bed. February 3rd, February 10th, February 17th, all returned, all undelivered. She tried to visit in March, but the hospital told her you weren't a patient anymore. She spent years trying to find out what happened to you. Eleanor moved toward the letters. Her hands, translucent, trembling, reached for the paper but couldn't quite touch it. She didn't forget me. No, she never forgot you. She mourned you her whole life. I pulled out the last document, a copy of Margaret's own obituary from 2019. She's buried in Delaware, and on her headstone it says, "Beloved sister of Eleanor." You were the last thing she thought about. For a long moment, Eleanor didn't move, didn't speak. The yellow light in the room pulsed, brightened, began to shift towards something warmer. Then she started to cry, not the cold, terrifying presence I'd encountered that first night. Just a woman, finally learning the truth she'd waited 37 years to hear. The tears ran down her cheeks and evaporated before they reached her chin, turning to mist, turning to nothing. "I thought she forgot," Eleanor whispered. "I thought everyone forgot. I was so angry, for so long." "I know." I stepped closer, close enough to feel the cold radiating off her, but it was different now, less sharp, less hungry. "But you weren't forgotten, Eleanor. You were lost. There's a difference." She looked at me, looked at the letters, looked at Michael Chen, still sitting in the chair, still breathing those shallow, barely there breaths. "I kept him because I was lonely," she said, "because I couldn't stand the thought of being alone again. I know. I've hurt him, hurt so many people, because I was hurt first, and I thought that made it okay." "It doesn't." I met her eyes, human eyes now, filled with pain instead of emptiness. "But you can stop. You can let him go. You can let yourself go." The light in the room shifted again, brighter now, warmer, losing that yellow, sickly quality and becoming something closer to sunlight. I watched Eleanor's form begin to change, the sharp edges softening, the hollow cheeks filling, the hospital gown transforming into something that might have been a dress she'd worn when she was healthy, when she was alive. "Will anyone remember me?" she asked. "After I'm gone?" "I will." I gathered the letters, held them against my chest. "I'll make sure the hospital knows what happened. I'll make sure your name goes back in the records. And I'll visit your grave, if you tell me where it is." Eleanor smiled. A real smile, not the terrible grin I'd seen that first night. The smile of a woman who'd finally, after almost 4 decades, found what she was looking for. "Thank you," she said, "for saying my name, for finding the truth, for treating me like a patient instead of a monster." The light blazed white. I closed my eyes, felt warmth flood through me, real warmth, filling the cold space that Eleanor had carved in my chest. When I opened them again, the room was empty. No bed, no equipment, no yellow light, just bare walls and bare floors, and a window that looked out onto the hospital parking lot, ordinary and unremarkable. Michael Chen was lying on the floor, unconscious but breathing. When the paramedics arrived, I'd called them the moment Eleanor vanished. They found him severely malnourished and dehydrated, but alive. He spent 3 weeks in recovery, unable to explain where he'd been or what had happened. Eventually, he transferred to a hospital in another state. I heard he doesn't practice medicine anymore. Room 714 is still empty. It stays off the rotation, officially listed as storage, but I've never heard sounds from inside, never seen that yellow light under the door. Whatever Eleanor Vance was, whatever she became in those years of loneliness and rage, she's gone now, finally discharged. But I still visit the 7th floor sometimes, still walk past that closed door, just to make sure it stays quiet. And once a year, on April 15th, the day Eleanor died, I bring flowers to a small grave in a cemetery across town. The headstone just says her name and dates, no mention of her sister. No explanation of who she was or how she died. But I remember, I remember a woman who was lost, not forgotten. A patient who needed care that no one gave her. A ghost who haunted a hospital because she couldn't bear to leave until someone acknowledged that she'd existed. I say her name out loud every time I visit. Eleanor Vance. Because some people just need to know that someone remembers. Story 5. The closet that opened while I was in the room. I heard the click before I saw it move. That small metallic sound, the tongue of a latch sliding free from its catch. I was sitting on my bed, laptop open, halfway through a paper that was due in 6 hours. It was almost 2 a.m., that dead stretch of night when the house settles into silence and every small noise feels amplified. The click cut through the quiet like a knife through paper. I looked up. The closet door, which I knew for a fact I'd closed before sitting down, was open about 3 inches. My first thought was the latch. Old houses have old hardware, and the latch on that closet had always been finicky. Sometimes it didn't catch properly, and the door would drift open on its own. I'd meant to fix it for months, kept forgetting, kept pushing it to the bottom of a to-do list that never got any shorter. I got up, crossed the room, and pushed the door closed, heard the click of the latch engaging, tested it with a gentle pull. Solid, secure, definitely closed. I went back to my bed, back to my laptop, back to the paper I was never going to finish at this rate. 10 minutes later, I heard the click again. I looked up. The door was open. Same 3 inches, same angle, like it had never been closed at all. This time I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear exactly, more like the first whisper of unease, the recognition that something wasn't quite right. Doors don't just open themselves. Latches don't just fail twice in 10 minutes after working fine for the 2 years I'd lived in this house. I got up again, walked to the closet, put my hand on the door, and felt it push back. Not hard, not aggressive. Just a gentle, steady pressure from the other side, like someone was leaning against the wood, testing my resistance. I froze, hand flat against the painted surface, feeling that impossible pressure against my palm. "Hello." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Is someone there?" The pressure stopped. The door went still under my hand. Just wood, just a door, just an ordinary closet in an ordinary house, in an ordinary neighborhood where nothing strange ever happened. I pulled it open. The closet was empty. Clothes on hangers, shoes on the floor, a few boxes stacked in the back corner. Nothing that could have pushed against the door. Nothing that could have made that pressure I'd felt. I stood there for a long moment, staring into the small dark space, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Just silence and shadows, and the faint smell of cedar from the blocks I'd put in to keep moths away. I closed the door, tested the latch. Solid, secure. I didn't go back to my paper. I sat on my bed and watched the closet, waiting, listening for that click. An hour passed, then 2. The door stayed closed. By the time the sun came up, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Sleep deprivation does strange things to perception. I'd been running on 4 hours a night for weeks, cramming for finals, pushing myself past the point of healthy functioning, feeling pressure that wasn't there, hearing sounds that didn't happen. It was all consistent with a brain that desperately needed rest. I finished my paper, submitted it, and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, the closet door was open, not 3 inches this time. All the way open, standing wide, the interior fully visible in the late afternoon light streaming through my window. I stared at it from my bed, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I'd closed that door. I remembered closing it, remembered checking the latch, remembered the solid click of metal engaging metal. And now it was open, and I'd been asleep for 14 hours. And anything could have happened in that time. Anything could have come out. I got up slowly, checked the room, the corners, the space under the bed. Nothing. Checked the hallway, the bathroom, the other rooms of the small house I rented alone. Nothing. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for the closet door standing open like a mouth waiting to speak. I called my landlord, asked if anyone had been in the house while I was asleep. Maintenance, inspections, anything. He said no. I asked about the closet door, about the latch, about whether there was any history of problems with the hardware. He said the house was built in 1952 and nothing had been updated since 1988. The closet was original to the structure. Why? He asked. Is something wrong with it? I didn't know how to answer. What was I supposed to say? The door keeps opening by itself, and sometimes I feel pressure from the other side, and I'm starting to think something is living in my closet. I told him the latch was loose. He said he'd send someone to fix it next week. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the closet door. Heavy oak, at least 200 pounds, impossible to move without serious effort. I went to bed feeling safer than I had in days. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of furniture scraping across hardwood. I lay frozen in the dark, listening. The sound continued, a slow, grinding slide, wood against wood, something heavy being pushed across the floor. My dresser, my 200-pound dresser, being moved by something that shouldn't exist. The scraping stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard the click. The latch, opening. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, pointed it at the closet. The dresser had been pushed aside. Not all the way, just enough to let the door swing open. And the door was open, wider than before, wide enough that I could see into the darkness inside. Wide enough that I could see the hand gripping the edge of the frame. Pale, long-fingered, wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, the proportions off, the joints bending at angles that didn't match human anatomy. It curled around the wood, holding the door open, and I watched as a second hand appeared beside it. Then a face, sliding into view from the darkness inside my closet. It didn't have eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should have been, stretched tight over sockets that held nothing. But it had a mouth, a wide, lipless gash that split its face nearly in two, and the mouth was smiling. "You kept closing the door," it said. The voice was wrong too, wet and clicking, like someone speaking through a throat full of gravel. That wasn't very polite. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but lie there, flashlight trembling in my grip, watching the thing pull itself out of my closet one impossible limb at a time. "I've been trying to introduce myself," it continued, "but you kept closing the door, kept pushing things in front of it, kept pretending I wasn't here." It was fully out now, standing in my bedroom, between me and the only exit, smiling that terrible smile. "I'm here," it said. "I've always been here. And now we're going to get to know each other." The flashlight died, and in the darkness, I felt it climb onto my bed. The weight was wrong, too heavy for something that had looked so thin, so stretched. The mattress sagged beneath it, springs groaning, and I felt the shape of it moving toward me, knees and hands pressing into the bedding, advancing inch by inch, that wet, clicking breath getting closer with every second. I screamed. Finally, belatedly, the paralysis broke and I screamed loud enough to tear my throat. I threw myself sideways off the bed, hit the floor hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I scrambled on hands and knees toward the door, toward the hallway, toward anywhere that wasn't this room with this thing. I made it 3 feet before something grabbed my ankle. Cold, so cold it burned, fingers wrapping around my leg with a grip like a vice. I was yanked backward, dragged across the hardwood, splinters biting into my palms as I tried to grab onto something, anything. "Don't run," the voice said, calm and conversational, like we were having coffee instead of whatever nightmare this was. "Running is rude. I've been patient. I've been waiting. The least you can do is stay and talk." I kicked, twisted, felt those fingers tighten until I thought my ankle would snap. Stop. The word was harder now, an edge beneath the pleasantness. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you make me. I stopped. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't move anymore. My body had locked up, every muscle frozen, like someone had flipped a switch and turned me off. Better. The grip on my ankle loosened. I felt the thing move, felt it circle around me in the darkness, felt its presence like a cold spot in the air. Now, let's start over. My name is, well, you couldn't pronounce it. You can call me whatever you like. What are you? The words came out as a whisper. I still couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't do anything but lie on my bedroom floor and wait. That's a complicated question. I've been called many things over the years. Demon, ghost, monster. None of them are quite right. I heard it settle somewhere nearby, heard the creak of weight on floorboards. I'm more like a neighbor, someone who lives close by, someone you've been ignoring. You live in my closet. I live in the space your closet opens into. There's a difference. That wet, clicking voice sounded almost amused. Your closet is just a door, a threshold. On this side, your bedroom. On the other side, somewhere else entirely. Somewhere else. Somewhere dark, somewhere old, somewhere that's been pressing against the walls of your world for a very long time, looking for ways through. A pause. Your closet has always been thin. The barrier there, it's worn, eroded. I've been able to see through it for decades, watching the people who lived in this room, but I could never get the door open, not until you. I felt something shift in my chest, not the paralysis, something else, something like dread, crystallizing into certainty. What did I do? You noticed. The thing moved closer. I felt cold breath on my face, smelled something ancient and wrong, like soil from a grave that had never been dug. Most people, when the door opens by itself, they close it and forget. They explain it away. Bad latch, drafty house, just their imagination. But you looked, you paid attention, you wondered. And that let you through? Attention is a kind of invitation. Wondering is a kind of welcome. I heard that lipless mouth stretch into a smile. You opened yourself to the possibility that something might be in your closet, and that possibility was all I needed. The paralysis released suddenly, all at once. I gasped, rolled onto my back, stared up at darkness that was absolute and complete. I'm going to turn the lights on now, the thing said. Don't be frightened. I know I look strange to you, but I promise I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I'm curious. Curious about what? About you, about your world, about all the things I've been watching through the crack in the door for so long. The floorboards creaked. I've seen so many people in this room, sleeping, waking, living their small lives, but I've never been able to talk to any of them, never been able to ask questions, to understand, to connect. The lights came on. I don't know how. The switch was across the room, and I hadn't heard the thing move toward it. But suddenly, the overhead fixture blazed to life, flooding the bedroom with harsh yellow light. The thing stood by the door. In the brightness, it looked even worse than it had in the darkness. Taller than I'd thought, nearly 7 feet, with limbs that were too long and a torso that was too narrow. Its skin was the color of old paper, stretched tight over bones that didn't quite match any anatomy I recognized. And that face, smooth where the eyes should be, split by that terrible grinning mouth. I know, it said, watching me stare. I'm not pleasant to look at. That's why I usually stay in the dark. I pushed myself up against the wall, as far from it as I could get without leaving the room. What do you want from me? Company. The word was simple, almost plaintive. I've been alone for so long. watching but never touching, listening but never speaking. Do you know what that's like? To be pressed against a window for decades, seeing everything, experiencing nothing. So you want to, what? Be friends? I want to understand. It took a step toward me and I flinched, but it stopped. Held up those wrong hands in a gesture that might have been meant to be soothing. I want to know what it feels like to be you, to live in the light, in the warmth, in a world where things make sense. Things don't make sense right now. You came out of my closet. Yes, but imagine how much less sense things make on my side. That grin widened, and I saw rows of teeth that were too small, too numerous, packed into that lipless mouth like seeds in a pomegranate. I want to learn, I want to experience, and I want you to teach me. And if I refuse? The thing was quiet for a moment. The grin didn't fade, but something behind it shifted, something colder. Then I go back through the door, it said, and I leave it open. And I let everything else that's been pressing against the barrier know that there's a way through. I thought about the darkness on the other side of my closet, the somewhere else that this thing called home. If this creature, strange and terrible as it was the curious one, the patient one, the one willing to talk instead of simply taking what it wanted. What were the others like? Okay, I heard myself say, I'll teach you. The thing's smile stretched impossibly wide. Wonderful, it said. We're going to be such good friends. And behind it, through the open closet door, I saw something move in the darkness. Something that wasn't as patient as my new companion. I named it Simon. It seemed to like that, or at least its terrible grin stretched wider when I said the word, and it repeated it back to me in that wet, clicking voice like it was tasting something sweet. Simon, Simon. Yes, I like that. I've never had a name before. The first few days were almost bearable. Simon was curious about everything. The texture of my sheets, the way water came out of faucets, the purpose of the tiny glowing rectangle I carried everywhere. It asked questions constantly, a stream of inquiries that ranged from the mundane to the existential. Why do you eat? Because I'll die if I don't. What does dying feel like? I don't know. I've never done it. How strange. On my side, we do it all the time. I learned things about Simon, too. It didn't need to eat, but it could. It consumed heat, drawing warmth from the air until my breath fogged and frost crept across the windows. It didn't sleep, but it rested, retreating into the closet for hours at a time to remember itself. It could make itself invisible, could flatten its body until it was thin as paper, could reach into spaces that shouldn't have been able to hold anything at all. And it was old. So old that my questions about its past were met with confusion, like I'd asked someone to describe the color of yesterday. Time worked differently where Simon came from. A decade might pass in what felt like a moment, or a single second might stretch into something infinite. How long have you been watching through my closet? I asked one night, sitting on my bed while Simon crouched in the corner, examining a paperback novel with those eyeless sockets. Watching your closet specifically? 60 years perhaps, 70, it's hard to say. And before that? Other closets, other doors. The thin places shift over time. One moment I'm looking through a crack in a child's bedroom in what you'd call the 1800s. The next, I'm watching a hospital supply room in your modern age. It turned a page with fingers that bent backward at the knuckle. I've seen so much, understood so little. What do you want to understand? Simon was quiet for a moment. Then it set down the book and turned toward me, that grinning face somehow conveying something almost like sincerity. Why you fight, it said. Why you struggle so hard to stay alive when death is inevitable. Why you form attachments you know will end in pain. Why you build things that will crumble, love people who will leave, pursue goals you'll never achieve. The grin widened. On my side, We don't do any of that. We simply exist. We endure. And I've always wondered if your way might be better. I didn't have an answer. What could I say? That struggle gave life meaning? That love was worth the grief? Those were platitudes, comfortable lies I told myself to get through the day. I wasn't sure I believed them anymore, not with a nightmare crouching in my bedroom asking me to justify the human condition. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe there's no reason. Maybe we're just built this way. Perhaps. Simon stood, unfolding upward until its head nearly brushed the ceiling. But I intend to find out. I have so much more to learn. It retreated into the closet then, folding its impossible body through the door frame, disappearing into that darkness that seemed to swallow light whole. I watched the door swing closed behind it, not latching, never latching now, and tried to convince myself that this was sustainable, that I could live with a monster in my closet, answering its questions, teaching it about humanity, pretending this was normal. Then I heard the scratching. It came from inside the closet, not from Simon's side of the door, from somewhere deeper, somewhere beyond, a sound like claws dragging across stone. Rhythmic, persistent, getting louder. The closet door creaked open an inch, just enough to let through a whisper of cold air and a smell like rotting meat. Simon's voice came from the darkness, but it sounded different now, tighter, worried. Close the door. What? Close the door, now. Push something in front of it. Don't let it open any wider. I was off the bed before I finished processing the words. I slammed my shoulder against the door, felt resistance on the other side. Not pressure this time, but weight. Something pushing back. Something trying to get through. What is that? I gasped, putting all my strength into keeping the door shut. Something that followed my trail. Something that smelled the opening I made. Simon's voice was coming from beside me now, from inside the room. It had come through somehow, slipped past while I wasn't looking. I told you, there are others on my side. Others who are not curious. Others who only hunger. The scratching intensified. I felt the door shudder against my shoulder, felt whatever was on the other side throw its weight forward. The wood groaned. The hinges squealed. What do they want? What do you think? Simon was beside me now, those wrong hands pressed against the door next to mine. They want what's on this side. They want the warmth, the light, the endless feast of living things that your world represents. I've watched through the cracks for decades and never tried to take anything. But them. The door bucked. Something cracked. They've been waiting for a door to open, and I opened one. Then close it. Send them back. I can't. The door only opens from your side. Once it's open, only you can shut it. I stared at the closet door, at the hairline fractures spreading through the wood, at the darkness visible through the gaps where something was tearing its way through. How? I demanded. How do I close it? You have to stop believing it's open. Simon's voice was urgent now, that clicking wetness sharper than I'd ever heard it. You opened it with your attention, your curiosity, your willingness to accept that something might be in the closet. If you can stop believing, truly stop, in the deepest part of yourself, the door will close. That's insane. I can see it. I can feel it. How am I supposed to not believe in something that's right in front of me? The door cracked. Through the gap, I saw movement, shapes that were darker than the darkness, reaching, grasping, pulling themselves toward the light. Figure it out, Simon said, or we both find out what happens when the hungry ones get through. The first hand broke through the door, covered in something wet, ending in claws that looked like they'd been designed to tear flesh from bone. And behind it, in the darkness, I heard laughter, cold and endless and absolutely starving. I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes. The sounds didn't stop. The scratching, the cracking, the wet slap of something pulling itself through splintered wood. I could feel the door shuddering against my shoulder, feel the cold pouring through the gaps, feel Simon beside me straining to hold back something that wanted nothing more than to tear us both apart. But I closed my eyes, and I tried to remember what it felt like before that first click, before the door opened by itself, before I started paying attention to the closet, wondering what might be inside, opening myself to possibilities that should have stayed closed. "It's not real," I whispered. "There's nothing in the closet. The door is closed. It's always been closed." The scratching intensified. I heard wood splinter, felt something cold and wet brush against my hand. "The latch is broken," I continued, squeezing my eyes tighter. "That's all. Old house, old hardware. The door drifts open sometimes. There's nothing behind it except clothes and boxes and shoes I never wear. It's not working." Simon's voice was strained. "You have to believe it, not just say it. The door can feel the difference. How do you make yourself believe something you know isn't true? How do you close your mind to evidence that's screaming at you from every direction? The cold, the sounds, the thing clawing through the door inches from your face." I thought about every time I'd dismissed something strange, every creak in the night I'd blamed on settling foundations, every shadow I'd convinced myself was just a trick of the light. The human mind was built for denial, for rationalization, for smoothing over the cracks in reality until everything fit into a pattern that made sense. I'd done it 1,000 times before. I could do it again. "There's nothing in my closet." I pressed harder against the door, felt the resistance weakening, felt something massive on the other side preparing to break through. The door opened because the latch is broken. I felt pressure because of air currents. I saw shapes because I was tired and stressed and my brain was playing tricks. The cold was spreading through my hands now, numbing my fingers, crawling up my arms. I heard that laughter again, closer, hungrier. Everything I saw was a hallucination. Everything I heard was my imagination. There's nothing on the other side of this door because there's nothing on the other side of any door except another room, another space, another piece of the ordinary world. Something screamed, not from outside, from inside the closet, from the darkness beyond, a sound of rage and frustration that shook the walls. "I don't believe in monsters," I said, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt something shift. The resistance against the door lessened. The cold receded an inch. "I don't believe in things that live in closets. I don't believe in doors that open into somewhere else." "More," Simon gasped. "Keep going. You're almost there." I poured everything I had into the denial, every rational thought, every skeptical impulse, every part of me that had always dismissed ghost stories and horror movies as ridiculous fantasy. I built a wall in my mind, brick by brick, thought by thought, a wall that said the world made sense, that monsters weren't real, that nothing existed except what could be measured and weighed and explained by science. "There is nothing in my closet." The screaming stopped. The cold vanished. The door went still under my hands. I opened my eyes. The closet door was closed. Intact. No cracks, no splinters, no claw marks in the wood. Just a door, ordinary and unremarkable, with a brass latch that caught the light from the overhead fixture. Simon was gone. I stood there for a long time, hands still pressed against the wood, waiting for the click, waiting for the door to drift open, waiting for something to prove that the last few days had been real, that I hadn't imagined every impossible moment. Nothing happened. I pulled my hands back, looked at my fingers. No frostbite, no damage, just skin that was slightly pink from being pressed against wood for too long. The closet was just a closet. The door was just a door. And I was alone in my bedroom in the middle of the night, with nothing to show for everything I'd experienced except the lingering echo of fear. I didn't open the closet that night. I went to bed, pulled the covers over my head like a child, and lay there until the sun came up. When I finally worked up the courage to check, to pull open that door and confirm what I already knew. The closet was empty. Clothes, shoes, boxes. No monsters, no doorways, no Simon, just a closet. I should have felt relief. Should have felt like I'd won, like I'd beaten back the darkness and reclaimed my ordinary life. Instead, I felt hollow. It's been 3 months since that night. I moved out of the house 2 weeks after it happened. Couldn't stand sleeping in that room anymore. Couldn't stand walking past that closet door and wondering if the click would come again. I found a new apartment, modern construction, sliding closet doors that couldn't drift open on their own, no history, no thin places. I threw away everything from the old bedroom, the sheets Simon had touched, the paperback novel it had examined with those eyeless sockets, even the clothes from the closet, because I couldn't look at them without remembering the darkness they'd hung beside. I tried to go back to normal, finished my degree, got a job, built a life that had no room for impossible things. I told myself the wall I'd built in my mind was permanent, that I'd sealed off whatever part of me had been open to the other side, that the door would stay closed forever. Most days, I believe it, but sometimes, late at night, I catch myself listening. The new apartment has a closet in the bedroom, different from the old one, different door, different latch, different everything. But sometimes, when the building is quiet and I'm hovering on the edge of sleep, I hear something that sounds almost like a click. I don't look, don't pay attention, don't let myself wonder, because I know now what wondering costs. Simon told me that attention is a kind of invitation, that curiosity opens doors that should stay closed. And I understand, in a way I didn't before, that the world is full of thin places, closets and corners and cracks in reality that only need a moment of belief to break wide open. The hungry ones are still out there, still pressing against the barriers, still waiting for someone to open their minds just enough to let them through. I won't be that someone, not again. But sometimes I think about Simon, about the creature that came through my closet not to feed, but to learn. The monster that asked questions about humanity instead of trying to consume it. I think about our conversations, brief as they were, and I wonder if it made it back to its side before the door closed. I wonder if it's still watching through some other thin place, some other crack in some other closet, trying to understand a world it can never truly enter. I think about what it said, that it wanted to know why we fight, why we love, why we struggle against inevitable endings. And I think maybe I understand now, in a way I didn't before. We fight because the alternative is to stop, to give in, to let the darkness win. I built a wall in my mind that night, brick by brick, denial by denial. And I've been maintaining it ever since, refusing to believe, refusing to wonder, refusing to open doors that might lead somewhere I can't come back from. But walls aren't permanent. Belief isn't binary. And some nights, when I'm tired and lonely and the world feels thin around me, I feel the mortar crumbling, feel the bricks starting to shift. Last week, I woke up at 3 a.m. to a sound from my closet. Just the building settling, I told myself. Old pipes, neighbors moving around. But as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I heard something else. 3 soft taps, like knuckles on wood, like something asking to be let in. I didn't get up, didn't look, didn't let myself believe. But when I finally fell back asleep, I dreamed of Simon, standing in the darkness beyond a half-open door, that terrible grin stretched across its eyeless face. "You can't stop wondering forever," it said. "Sooner or later, everyone opens the door again." I woke up gasping, heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. The closet door was closed. But this morning, when I was getting dressed, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A crack in the wood, hairline thin, running from the top of the frame to the bottom. It could have been there when I moved in. Could have been there all along, invisible until the light hit it just right. Or it could be new. I'm not going to look at it, not going to wonder about it, not going to open my mind to possibilities that should stay closed. But tonight, before I go to bed, I'm going to push my dresser in front of the closet. Just in case the door remembers how to open, and just in case something on the other side remembers me.